I'd like to call this meeting to order. So, good evening, everyone. This is October 23rd. This is a regular meeting of the Pear Bldg Committee. Thank you all for coming. And the first order of business is the approval of the minutes from our last meeting on October 9th. Those have been circulated, I know, so just ask if anybody has any comments or amendments to those. Anyone?
Motion to approve.
Wonderful. Seconds. All those in favor? Thank you. Okay, that's great.
Actually, I think I was not the last meeting, so I think I have to abstain.
Actually, now remember, it's down at Robert's
Oh, I
rules.
can't remember
Robert's
Robert's
rules.
rules. I read it.
I
If you read it,
found
you're
in
good with it.
Robert's rules, that's not correct. I'll remember the false impression that was correct.
And then things.
Okay, so the next item here is update on kind of where we're at with things, and just kind of reflecting over the last couple of weeks of kind of leading up to where we are. We have a certain amount of business to cover in this meeting. I think there was a question as to whether we should have this week or not, or push it back a week. But certainly, I think there's enough going on here where it was important for us to get together, and also. I think maybe the public might notice, but if you don't, I'll just clarify that we've moved public comment to the end of the meeting, and that was actually in response to, I think, the request from a number of folks over the course of a period of time to have public comment following our comments. So we have some business to conduct, and then we'll just open up the meeting for public comment once we get past that. So I thought I'd reflect on a couple of things and then just open it up for discussion here. And maybe the first thing to do is to recap what's happened since our last meeting. So just a few important items to note. So there was a meeting, it was I guess characterized as an informal meeting with the Architectural Review Board that took place on 10/15. Neil Howe, Brian O'Connor, in fact presented the schematic plans and updated the Architectural Review Board on our current status of where things stand. So that did take place. We had informal comments back from the Architectural Review Board. I circulated those to the committee today. We'll get those up on the website also. I'll go through this and then we can open it up and we can decide whether we want to discuss any of that. But maybe I'll just go through initially the list of things that have taken place since our last meeting. So that took place. There was an update to the Parks and Recs Commission on the 16th done by Neil Howe, just to bring the commission up to date in terms of where we stand with work that had taken place since the last update to the commission. And then Lori and I had the privilege of updating the RTM, our first presentation to the RTM on the 21st. I guess that was Tuesday?
That was
Monday. Losing track of dates here, Monday. There's been a fair amount going on. The other thing that's taking place is today is the application date, the date by which, final date by which applications have to go in for the Zoning Board of Approval public comment meeting in November. So that meeting will take place November 20th. At that point, we will present in a formal way, the plans that have been established and get their feedback. So I think the important thing to note from my perspective, and I passed around to the committee this little flow chart. So this flow chart is one that I put together when we first got things kicked off. And by the way, maybe just one other kind of reference here. Tomorrow is our 1-year anniversary, so this committee has been meeting for a year as of tomorrow. I think we've accomplished a tremendous amount. In terms of my own editorial comments, I'm proud of the work that the committee's done. It's a committee that's made up of a lot of diverse opinions here, and I think it's been a good, open, and transparent discussion to get us to where we are here. This is just a really reminder to the committee members, and I think maybe we can put this up on the website as well, just to show how many, in fact, approval steps are required. And I think last count, I thought there were 11 on this page. Not to go ahead and count them all up right at this stage, but so the path that we're on right now is it's ZBA, the official ZBA meeting, ARB in December, moving on to planning and zoning in January if all goes well with ZBA and ARB. It's been determined, I did this back last November, it's been determined that we don't have to go to EPC based upon kind of the location of the beach and the jurisdiction of EPC. we have been discussing and updating status of the project with DEEP, and there'll be a formal application that'll take place with Connecticut DEEP, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, and that'll be a rigorous conversation that we'll have with DEEP. What isn't on this page at the time when I put this together, because once again it's just reflected my understanding of what had to take place is FEMA, and there have been extensive conversations that have taken place with FEMA, ultimately resulting in an acknowledgement by FEMA that at least the plans as they currently stand are in full compliance with FEMA's requirements. And then once we go through the land use and the zoning approval process, we then move on to the next stage, which is a series of dialogues with the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and ultimately culminating in our discussions with the RTM. So I think, what everybody should take away from this is a very, very rigorous process that this committee is going to have to go through before anything ultimately is decided on and gets approved. So I just thought it was interesting. I dug this out today just to remind myself of where we were when we started the process. So just thinking here, what else? I've also circulated some documents today to the members of the committee. So I mentioned I circulated the ARB informal comments. And then as part of, I guess, the preparation for the application to ZBA, Jeremy Ginsburg provided to Neil, because I think it was required, or at least kind of the reference to it was required for this presentation to ZBA, the 1978 filings to ZBA. And so I found them interesting. I think those are available as a public documents. They're publicly available. That was the ZBA application to allow for the reconstruction of the buildings that had burnt down in 1978 or 1977, whatever they burnt down. It's kind of just interesting to read back through that. Ultimately, there are two, I guess, elements of that are relevant to us. One is that the ZBA at that point approved the variance for the rear yard setback, which is what this committee is asking for in the next ZBA, with our ZBA application. And just to clarify, the property line at the beach is in fact the mean high water mark, and that serves as the property line. And there's a 40-foot setback requirement. It applies to all properties, all residential properties. I don't know if it applies to commercial properties as well throughout the town. And in our case, it applies to the buildings that are at the beach. The existing buildings are actually encroaching on that rear yard setback. Referencing back to the 78 filings, the ZBA approved the variance to allow those buildings to be placed where they are, which is, once again, kind of within that rear yard setback. The other interesting thing is there were recommendations from two bodies within town. One is DPW, and the other was, I believe it was called the
Flood and erosion, I think.
The Flood and Erosion, yeah, which apparently was a committee or committee that had since gone away, and it's been rolled up, and Jeremy tells me it's been rolled up into EPC. The Flood and Erosion Control Board, Darien Flood and Erosion Control Board. And their recommendation was at the time that ZBA application was done, that the building be raised to elevation 13. So just for reference, the current building is at elevation 8. The proposal of the existing the building that we're dealing with here, so the proposal that's come out of the committee and in full compliance with FEMA is that the building be raised to elevation 16. And already in 1978, and I'm not sure when FEMA, I meant to go back and take a look at this, when FEMA was actually even created, but already in 1978, there were two bodies in town that were recommending that building be raised to elevation 13, which, had it been raised to elevation 13, would have only been 3 foot below the elevation that we're proposing. I looked through the filings. Maybe there's some filings elsewhere that explain why planning and zoning didn't feel that was necessary. But in any case, just a point of interest here. So a lot of information that's been gathered. We're kind of, as I mentioned, we're entering into this approval phase, which I'm very happy to kind of moving into, because I think it's another opportunity for us to get important feedback from all the land use and approving bodies in town. And of course, we'll take that approval, that feedback into consideration, and we'll make whatever changes are necessary based upon the information that we get back through that process. So maybe with that, I'll just, that's kind of, I think that brings us to kind of an update as to where we are at the moment. And maybe just open that up to the committee if there are any questions in terms of things that have happened since our last meeting, or if anybody would like to reflect on where we are after 1 year, or...
I'd just like to say, to just remind everybody that the FAQ is up on the website, and we would like to continue adding to that as we see
That's a good point.
some misinformation or perhaps an email that came in that we need to clarify. So I think together we should really, at some point, take a look at what we should be adding.
Which reminds me of the point that at the RTM meeting, we were given a list of questions by folks within the community who were looking for further clarification. We'll answer those, and we'll get those up on the FAQ, and we appreciate those.
We also put
questions.
some on the case out in the hallway as well.
Okay.
So, and with that, if we add any, we'll then take those down and put in the new document.
Yeah, I think, if I'm understanding correctly, the idea would be, the goal is to continue to maintain that FAQ as a current document that reflects kind of feedback and information that's coming out of whatever questions we're getting, right? So,
Mike,
yeah.
in your research, did you find anything about the boat ramp and why it was designed the way it is, as opposed to being designed more properly? For lack of a better term.
I haven't, but it's a great point to go back and kind of maybe research some of the early information around.
Because, as most of us know, it's not properly angled.
I might have some information in my office.
Okay, what I want to do is try to avoid that mistake again.
Yes.
Especially as we look today in the next couple of weeks.
I'm
and
pretty
early.
certain that the files that Sue had are in our computer.
I just want to make sure we're not going to make the same mistake.
Right. I'll try to dig them out for the next meeting.
Do most of the boat club members use that to remove their boats for the season? There's no choice for the boat club.
It depends on what you're doing. I don't have a trailer, so I don't use it, but I was,
Some people are having a hard time hearing you, so if you could speak up.
I'm sorry, I was decommissioning my boat on Saturday, and there was a line of about 8 boats waiting to get to the ramp. Now, it was on a high tide, obviously, when you need to use it, but it was kind of fun to see a parking lot of boats lined up, and it's not a simple process. It's probably a 15-30-minute process to get the trailer in the water, get it on, secure it, so you can drive it up the ramp, and then they go into the parking lot, hold it down, and drive home, or drive wherever they want. But
Typically, a lot of those, out of those 8, did you witness that 8 of those trailers stayed?
I don't know what you mean,
He's
stay.
saying they were coming out.
Oh, they were
So we're
coming.
coming out.
Gotcha.
So they were lined up.
Every season, gotcha.
It wasn't-
Trailers and boats were lined
I
up on
understand.
both sides, by the
Yes.
parking area and at the boat ramp. And then Mr. Freight came in with his boat and unloaded some of his shellfish, which made it interesting, but.
Well, I think you also, Randy, you had also had some kind of historical view of what happened with the...
Yeah, I got some anecdotal evidence from one of the coastal engineers that was involved in designing that. And she basically said, when they were doing it, they wanted to go steeper, but because of the ledge and the way that the existing riprap was constructed, it was going to be not prohibitively expensive, much more expensive than what they initially budgeted. So they agreed to leave it at the to reconstruct it at the shallower pitch. So I think the reason it's not pitched properly was a money issue and not a design issue.
I agree. Yeah, it was a financial issue. The Board of Finance cut money back at that time, and we didn't have the money that we really wanted to do the job the right way. That's what I understand in my memory.
That's pretty much the way
Yeah.
But that was a reconstruction as well, wasn't it? Because that boat ramp was already there.
Yes.
Yeah, so they were trying to improve.
Yes, and that's when we put all the new dock alongside the walkway, and the new pilings, and all that went in then, at that point.
Right.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm just gonna ask, since we're talking about the boat ramp, and maybe Tom, you can take a look at this and Randy, but I just want to be sure with the, parking design, there's adequate turnaround space and adequate space during the summer season, not when people are just taking it out at the end and there's hardly any traffic, for the boats to maneuver and to park at the side. I can't tell from the plans,
We'll look at that. when we get
because I
closer.
think that's very important.
It's very important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with you. We should take a careful look at that when we get to a final parking plan.
I think that tonight we should go over the ARB information that we got. Mike and I were at that meeting and we weren't allowed to speak. It was just, as he said, a presentation from Neil. But with the concerns that they had, I'm thinking maybe we should go over this because he's going to present it to them on November 20th.
No, just a
Oh, no,
correction.
that's the ZBA.
Yeah, it'll be in December, the ARB.
November 26th.
Well, ARB will be in December, following ZBA.
Oh, so we've taken this one out?
I think they have to get the correct paperwork in by then in order to meet.
Then they have to,
Yeah.
okay, oh, I see, yes. Put the glasses on and it'll probably help the situation.
I mean,
Jesus. Anyway, Neil's not here tonight, and I'd like to go over some of these concerns that they had and discuss it with us and maybe give Neil some of our insight on these concerns that the ARB had, so that when he goes in to give a presentation, he has that information with him and we don't have to come back again
sure.
5 times to get it right. So can we just quickly go through some of this? Well, go through the comments. We don't need to go through the presentation. We know.
No, but how about if I do this? Would this work for you? I'll be happy to read through the summary of what Neil presented and then read through the comments, and then we can kind of talk about, is it? Because I think if we're going to talk about the feedback, we should talk about also what he initially presented.
Sure.
Does that work?
Yeah. Just, just to do it quickly, but because I think we need to discuss some of this.
Yeah, okay. So this is once again a summary that was forwarded along by Dave Keating that represents the sense of the informal sense of the ARB. And in advance of the ARB's summary comments, what Dave has done is summarize what Neil had presented. So I'll just go through those bullets. There's a handful, but more than a handful, but it's worth, I think, setting the context. So the first is, so this is once again reflecting what Neil presented, what the architect presented. So the first is, primary architectural driver for the new second floor is conformity to FEMA regulations in a VE 15 zone, which means the second story deck will be about 17 feet above sea level, or about 9 feet above the level of the parking lot. So that's the first point. Second is pulling the parking lot back and extending the beach in preparation for rising tides. New grass plantings will be installed to protect from storm flooding and movement of sand from beach to the parking area, instead of building a dune or structural wall between the parking lot and the water. Third element, and once again, this is Dave's perspective on what Neil was presenting, which is accurate, but it's in his words. Parking lot will be repaved and restriped with 31 less spaces. Some of the parking spaces will be pavers instead of asphalt. Portion of the picnic area to be resurfaced as pavers for increased elderly access and to create more permanence. New plantings, including more shade trees of an undetermined nature, will continue throughout the site and along the road. Remodeling the existing bathroom structure unit to keep bathrooms at grade and keeping separate of the new structure. As per Darien Town zoning rules, 5 foot between the current / upgraded bathroom structure and the proposed new building, so that's referring to this Darien zoning 5-foot rule. Proposed main structure will need a variance from ZBA to locate new structure and wraparound deck close to mean high water line, less than 40 feet from the water. That's the rear yard setback variance. Chose shallow shed roof with low point facing parking lots, so the building presents a more minimalist mass as possible. Next is materials. White cedar shingled second story. First story will be some sort of horizontal shiplap siding. Roof will be standing seam metal roof, could be copper, zinc, galvanized metal, determined by budget. Elevator tower, component of new building, and existing detached bathroom building will be glazed blue brick. Want to make sure the elevator shaft and bathroom differentiate themselves from the rest of the new structure. Decking and stairs would be ipe, which is a form of hardwood, or some other synthetic product that will weather gray. Railing details ought to be determined, but will likely be some sort of wire mesh or cable system. The existing gazebo won't be touched, but a new 16 by 34 foot deck between the gazebo and the water will be accessed by a new ramp and stairs. New deck, ramp, stairs will need setback variance from ZBA. And then next steps, variance application to ZBA, back to ARB, application to Planning and Zoning, Selectmen and Board of Finance. So that is Dave Keating's reflection on what was presented at the meeting. And then the comments now, I'll share the summary of the comments that were made by the ARB. So the first is, there were mixed reviews on the proposed mass of structure and materials to be used. Mixed reviews on the color palette. Majority disliked the blue brick and prefer sand and stone tones, but one member expressed favor to the blue.
Mike, could you go back to the first comment?
Sure.
I understand the proposed massive structure and materials to be used.
Should we talk about each one?
We can, however you guys would like to do it.
Yeah.
Would you like to go one at a time then?
Yes.
Okay. So the first then is mixed reviews on the proposed mass of structure and materials to be used. So for those of us that were there, I guess my interpretation would be that there was, once again, a good healthy discussion on all these elements. And there was some discussion as to the size of the elevated structure, the decking around the elevated structure, and kind of the general characteristics of the elevated structure. And I think, as this is saying, you know, it wasn't as though there was a kind of unanimous sense in one direction or another. I think it was, I think the ARB, and I'm not going to try to characterize it too much, but the ARB kind of, members weighed in one form or another, and I think Dave is characterizing that as being kind of a mixed opinion on the part as to, in other words, some liked the way it looked, some were suggesting maybe it should look a little differently in terms of the size, or we're just questioning the size. And Cheryl, you were there, so.
Right, yeah, they were questioning the size of the structure and then the material being used. But we had said above that we were going to use shiplap and shingles, and I think their comments were keep it all the same. So it's either shiplap or it's shingles, but don't split it up.
Right, and I think, you know, like I kind of used the analogy of, I explained it to somebody else, of like those word diagrams where you see like how often a word is used in a particular article, and like the biggest words are the ones that are the most used. And I think quite a lot, I would say kind of disproportionately more of that conversation focused also on the blue brick. And, you know, the fact that the colors were different and it was blue brick and kind of...
And I think we all agreed that we weren't that happy with the blue brick either at one of our meetings when that first came out.
So that's the kind of...
I'm thinking, yeah, they had a mixed review of it, but there was only basically one person that said they didn't mind it. I'm thinking out loud. As we go through this, should we vote on each one of these to be able to present it to Neil as the way we're thinking on this? Do you want to do it that way, or should we star the ones that we want to vote on and then vote it as one vote at the end?
So it's a good point. It's a good point you're making, and maybe the way to do this is, because so just one person's opinion, but I think kind of I think what's important and valuable about the stage that we're at is we're now going to be interacting with these approving bodies, and they'll have an opinion. So I guess what I'd like to suggest is that we allow for the feedback from these, because right now we have an informal, this is an informal kind of reflection of their ideas. I think we're going to get a kind of more formal view at some point. So maybe the way to say this is to kind of, maybe another way to do this is to kind of indicate, I don't know if we want to get into talking about colors, or we want to indicate whether or not we're kind of flexible on something and not, you know. Like, I'm feeling flexible about the colors, I guess, is the simplest way to say it.
Well, they talked about the blue brick, and when they talked about the blue brick, it was basically to keep the whole building the same and be consistent.
Well, I think it was a
That's the
different,
way
yeah, I mean, I took it away, it was also, I don't know if it was reflected here differently, but I think it was about the palette also. I think they talked about, it even, the next point actually it talks, so I think it was more like, maybe the blue they felt was a bit harsh, and they were suggesting maybe a kind of a softer palette, and I think that's reflected in the next.
Yeah,
So they didn't care that it was brick, just the color.
Correct.
No.
And we're suggesting something that maybe kind of harmonized better, you know, like, I think they accepted Neil's point that architecturally what he was attempting to do is kind of create some differentiation between elements of the structure, but like, just soften the palette a little bit.
Well, like Cheryl said, I think that's consistent with exactly how this committee responded, so.
Yeah.
I mean, indicating some flexibility on them, be reasonable.
I'm not a fan of the blue.
I mean, if you know,
Yeah.
One of the arguments against the blue is that over time, it's pitted, and it's white or tan underneath, so it looks like it's got leprosy.
it's also not subtle. I mean,
No,
I also-
agree.
And that's what their point was, it pops out.
Yeah,
My first thought was it was actually done for emphasis on
Right,
the plan. I wasn't thinking it was going to end up being blue.
so let's start that.
Yeah, and I guess I would just suggest, and once again, there's one person here, but I'm not sure we need to vote on these, but I think we can collect the sense of the committee and take that back to
To Neil, so
Neil.
that he can
Say, hey, look, we talked about these things.
turn it around when
Exactly.
he presents it to ZBA, and
Yeah.
then maybe they'll decide that night that, oh, this is great and we're done. Otherwise, we might have to go back again.
Yeah, so it seems to me we have a
You know, we're
consensus
trying to get things
that we're flexible on the colors,
Blue's the blue.
which are the first two, yeah.
No
Did the
blue.
shiplap have to do with the need for it to be flow through?
Well, I was gonna say, I think he's got it, and it's really Neil's prerogative, or we gotta go with his guidance, because the structure on the bottom has to be breakaway.
Right.
It may limit his choices, and, you know, it's really up to him as the architect to figure out how to match that
Right.
with what's on the second floor.
Right, and then the shingling, I think, was to be more the, typical New England style, but
And I'm
I'm
not-
just thinking
I'm
of
not
the
sure you
yacht
can
club
make
that
it-
has the shiplap on the first floor, and I think it has to
Yeah.
do with the ability for the water to flow.
My recollection is there wasn't a major objection, it was more like, kind of, I think,
I don't know, but I just wonder.
He didn't come back with basically any comments on anything. He listened to what they had to say, right, Mike?
yeah,
That's what he should have done.
Yeah,
yeah.
so.
So why don't we keep going then, because
Yeah.
shiplap shows up here too,
Yeah.
right? So the next item was the favorability of the standing seam metal roof. Copper would be ideal. So what that's simply indicating is that I think the general consensus with people like the members of the AOB, and once again, I'm being very cautious, so I don't want to attempt to kind of suggest I'm kind of speaking for them, but Cheryl, you keep me honest here. So I think there was a general consensus that they were okay with the suggestion of the standing seam metal roof.
Yes, they said it was fine at that point.
Yeah, and there was some discussion around the standing seam metal roof of materials, as is mentioned back in the note here. Neil suggested a couple of different materials: copper, zinc, galvanized metal. I think in every case, because the question did come up, I think he indicated that the ideal is to select a material, of course, and his recommendation for this material is he's suggesting that this will last 100 years. So even if it doesn't, I think any of these, now maybe if it's copper, but I think he was even suggesting might have a long life, but we'll have to get his clarification on that.
He's an optimist.
No, I understand, and 100, if it's, whatever, but for the longevity of it, right? And I think what was also discussed is the fact that these will weather to kind of like a dull pewter, so there's no fear here of these things being highly reflective or being able to be seen from a satellite in outer space or an airplane passing over and, kind of blinding people. But I think there was a general kind of sense that the ARB, Cheryl, I thought, was okay with the suggestion of the standing seam metal roof, right? Okay. So then the next is need clarification on type of material being used for first floor, a possible shiplap siding. One member suggested continuing the white cedar shingle down from the second story. I think Neil has to come back to us on that, right? Because I think that was, and I think the suggestion about the cedar shingle was once again back in line with, kind of creating a much more harmonized look, and also attempting to get to, a bit more of a New Englandish kind of weathered coastal look. So that's where that came from. The next is paving of a portion of the picnic area was viewed unfavorably, particularly if there will be handicap access and concessions at the newly erected building. So I think it speaks for itself. I think there was kind of, more than one person who felt that.
I wonder if we could also, I was going to jump in earlier, but I think it's important that the public knows that there's still going to be picnic tables in the sand as there are today. It's just simply allowing handicap accessibility for that side. So if somebody does come in a wheelchair or a cane or a walker, what have you, they still can picnic at that area, whereas they can't today.
Yeah, it's a good point, and there was some discussion about the size of what was being suggested as pavers. And Neil O'Brien, members of the architectural team, kind of accurately indicated, that hasn't been decided on. And the objective, once again, because somebody asked, well, why are you doing this, to your point, what's the objective? And that was to create handicap access or accessibility. And I think that's a nice aspect of it. I'm completely appreciative of the fact that it exists the way it does today, and people like to be able to sit out there in the sand. So I guess we can open it up here and decide if there's some flexibility on that or how strongly everybody feels on it.
This was another one that the committee was relatively, there was a lot of conversation around this, and there were differences of opinions, particularly with respect to the size of what that paving would look like if there was paving at all.
Yeah.
And I think everybody recognized that it's nice to have handicap accessibility, but everybody also recognized the desire to keep as much of the beach as the beach.
Yeah.
So is this another one where we could say we're flexible on this point?
I'll go on
I think
record
it
and
would
say
be
I'm
interesting to
flexible.
know, to get a perspective of it, can you put 4 picnic tables on there? And then maybe we'll have a feeling for, it's not that large. It only has 4 tables or 2 tables, right, whatever that may be.
Maybe 4 out of 8 are on the pavement,
Right.
and something like that.
Right, that might give you a little bit better perspective.
But I mean, is that realistic in terms of handicapped? I mean, they have formulas. It might, 4 out of 8 would be 50%. 50% of the picnickers aren't
Right.
handicapped.
Or maybe it's just one,
Yeah.
maybe. But I
I
think
think-
flexibility is the
Yeah.
If your family's out there and you want to join them,
Yeah.
and just because there's handicap accessibility at the building, but you want to join your family over here, it's a nice opportunity to have that.
It's hard to tell the size right now.
Mhm.
It looks
Yeah.
rather large to me. I would
Right.
vote in reducing it,
I
but
agree.
I'd also like to hear what the size is.
Yeah, and I think maybe
Agreed.
we may have communicated the impression that it was also larger than it needs to be here,
Well, I think in one of Dan's early schemes, there was a lot more paving in that corner. And in the most recent one, they've cut it down considerably.
And I think that was in response to the commentary.
Right, so that you could have
Agreed.
tables in the beach and chairs still in the sand, and still have an area.
Maybe to help us get off this topic, the picnic tables won't be permanently placed, right?
Correct.
Well, so if one's not enough, we move another one
Right,
in.
right.
Yeah.
If two's not enough, we move another one in.
Sure.
Until we get the limit of the paving space.
Yeah.
That's a very good point, Mark. But people do move these picnic tables around all the time, because if they have a large party, then they
Sure.
put 6 of them together and, line them up, or if they have, it catered or whatever, they have a catering table at one end and the rest of them, so they could, but I do want to know the size of this. I
On the
think
paved
that's-
area, 'cause
yeah,
that's still
on the
gonna be
paved
the
area.
issue, right? How
That's
big's the
a
paved
huge
area?
area.
I think one of the points, Cheryl, correct me here, I think one of the points that was made also, when the observations that was made, was that there was kind of an acknowledgement that there's an effort that's being made in the design to activate additional space for handicap access, either through the ramps and the decks, or, so I think through that observation, I think the question was, okay, that's great, we're doing that, and being mindful of that, kind of paraphrase, how much of that do we need to do, I guess, in that setting, right? Do you
Well-
recall that? And that came up really in the context of the decks around the gazebo, but I think there is kind of, I think it's a good question, we are doing a lot now, attempting to do a lot in terms of activating space for accessibility, and this could be a case where maybe less is better than more, and at least initially. We could always go back and add more if we wanted to.
Well, right where they have that gate that's open, that you can open and close over there, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 parking spaces over there, and at one point, we thought we had to take those out because that gate had to be there. But now, since we heard from the fire department that they don't need or use that gate.
Let me just comment on that. That's really, I'm sure Joe can drive a truck through anything, but it's really the fire marshal that's going to decide whether you need the gate or not.
Yes.
Right,
Yes.
and he talked to the fire marshal.
As he
Did he?
Well, I think we gotta get the
I
fire.
didn't hear that he did.
That-
Well,
It's all good, but we're gonna have to get a,
yeah, it's not his prerogative to talk to the fire marshal, it's someone either from the committee or Neil from the architect
All right.
to talk to the fire
Well,
department.
let's
just to
just
confirm.
assume, let's just assume we put the fence all the way down. There's 5 parking spaces there that could be, because we have 2 handicap parking spaces over on the side. And then if we do the pavers in this area over in here, instead of like the circle, but move it over and make it a square or whatever, then we could have those handicap spots right there too. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Mesh it together.
But then we have to ask Neil to confirm with the fire marshal whether that gate's going to be required or not.
Agreed.
All right.
Okay, that's really,
That be Neil or Dan?
He's the man.
well.
Well, we should do that
Neil
anyway.
Yeah, I
and
mean,
Dan-
We don't
we'll
need
get
it.
it.
Dan's
Like up to
busy
Bobby in the morning.
working for Neil, so, yeah, they have.
and I had, you know, I'm due a visit to the fire marshal myself just to ask him about this stuff, so hopefully they visit at some point. But maybe the only other point that I would make that's relevant to this is, to the extent that I think we have a really kind of well-progressed design for the buildings, that's not the case with the site plan at this stage for elements, like we don't have,
Right.
we're not
we
at
don't
that
have
stage
anything.
with plantings and this stuff, so we're gonna have an opportunity to really dig into that a lot more, no pun intended, and kind of progress that further, so. But I would say I'm flexible here, so I think we're saying we're flexible on that, the size of this, the paver space, right, Cheryl? That's your read? Okay, so the next is questioning the added platform and the access ramp to the gazebo, and maybe a compromise could be found here, less platform or no platform or ramps, or just refurbishment of current gazebo with no additives. If handicap access is addressed elsewhere, does it also need to be addressed at this location? And the elsewhere that I believe the members were referring to was the kind of upper level adjacent to, you know, the flexible community space. I think they were kind of acknowledging, like, we've got those decks around that. Those decks are ADA accessible. So I think there was a questioning here as to whether or not, and I think that was a good, healthy discussion around that. I don't think anybody ruled it out, but I think there was a good, healthy discussion. And clearly, as it's saying here, I think it's kind of suggestion of maybe reworking that in some way. I think what they were concerned about, let me just see, maybe it's raised.
You read the next one.
Yeah. So the next one I think kind of captures the context of it. The gazebo should not be hidden by ramps and stairs on all 4 sides. Perhaps ramps going only to a slightly lower and smaller platform on the far side of the beach, thus exposing 3/4 of the gazebo and the natural rocks for the beach area. And I would say if blue brick was one of the topics that got disproportionately a lot of discussion, I would say this is right up there in terms of the amount of conversation that took place at the meeting. And part of it, as it says here, was around kind of, there was some concern that there's some beautiful rock outcroppings to the north kind of structure, the north of the structure supporting the gazebo, and there's some concern that those would be covered over. And there's an appreciation for how beautiful those look. And then just also the size of the ramps, and if you guys recall, on the north side, adjacent to the buildings, the concession, there's a ramp, and then it ends up with that terminates at a landing area, and then there's another viewing deck, and then there's another ramp that goes up behind the gazebo to the next. So I think one of the elements that was being proposed here is maybe find some way of, another way to get to, preserve the ramp that was out on this kind of, you know, the south beach side of it, and find another way to get up to that and eliminate those ramps and, you know.
Was
just to
there
kind
any
of-
discussion about the lack of, the additional space now that people can enjoy that space, whereas today, all the conversations I have with residents about the gazebo is that somebody's in the gazebo, no one really uses
Nobody
that
else
area
can use it,
anymore, and
yeah.
you feel like you're invading their space. So now with these with these landing decks, that other people can enjoy that space as
Yeah,
well.
and there was, Neil pointed that out, and I think there was an appreciation for that. And I think the feedback was just to say, okay, it's great. You guys may be attempting to do maybe more than you need and just go back and rethink whether or not you'd be happy with a little less of that and still accomplish what you're, I think that was the guidance, that's my read on the guidance. Cheryl?
Yeah, I mean, it is a landmark in Darien, and it's been there for a zillion years, and I pointed that out at I think our last meeting when we were looking at that maybe the back side, which is the west side, eliminating that 30-foot, I talked to Neil about it and said, maybe we can eliminate that ramp there and go in from the side by the concession stand there now, and do it that way instead of having a ramp wrapped all the way around. And maybe that would get through ARB.
Yeah, and by the way, I think the way this works, and maybe others here know better than me, I think the way this works is these are recommendations that ARB makes to ZBA and planning and zoning. So I'm not sure it's a get-through thing more so than these are these are recommendations that we should be paying attention to.
Right.
So my recollection of that discussion in the community was that that whole decking around the gazebo was viewed very favorably by pretty much everyone. For all the reasons of creating more viewing space, creating more access to more people, and it looked quite nice in the designs.
Yeah.
But having said that, if there are alternatives that take away some of the lead-up ramps, I mean, wouldn't it make sense to look at them?
Yeah.
So putting that out to Neil, why not?
Yeah. I was out there on Monday and kind of took the time, it was a beautiful day, and I took the time to kind of sit in all corners of the gazebo and kind of get confused from all spots. And then I walked out on the jetty there, the jetty that's kind of collapsed down on the rocks, and I just thought to myself, this is just a wonderful space if you can kind of, without having to worry about breaking an ankle, if you could get out on there and kind of enjoy the space. So this is an item that I'm flexible on. I don't know if Neil, if there's a kind of an architectural way to kind of get up to that, without having, I don't know how he's got to get a ramp to do that if part of what we're trying to achieve here is to make it ADA accessible. But one person's opinion is I'd certainly be satisfied if we had that and didn't have the other stuff, I guess. And I'm also sensitive to preserving, the beauty of the gazebo. I mean, it's wonderful. It's a beautiful space. Architecturally, it looks really lovely. If there's anything else we can do to kind of just shore it up and make sure it's there for a long time, that would be great. So, and I think if it were just that one side of the gazebo, then from a sightline perspective, it's almost like it's not, hard to really see. You wouldn't necessarily be seeing, in the same way that you'd be seeing it from other angles. So anyway, that's what I think their take was here. I'm flexible on that.
I'm flexible, sir.
I think maybe where the stairs are now, which are so steep and treacherous, maybe we can get something on that angle where they are now. Let's leave it up to Neil, but let him know that we are very concerned about all of this. I think that's...
Yeah, I think if we were to go back to Neil on this and say, okay, consider, that viewing deck in one location without these decks here, without this other platform here, let them try to figure that out and come back to us.
I'd like to add one thing too, because a lot of the emails that have been coming in have been saying, how can you, those platforms are going to obstruct view, which is not true. It's not obstructing any view, it's adding view.
Yeah, I think that's what these guys were weighing in on. Okay.
Well,
So
none of us want not to have a ramp up to the gazebo.
Right.
To leave.
We need some way to get people... Right.
We want it to be ADA compliant so you can get up there.
Somehow,
And
right.
we also want, sort of speaking for myself, if I go up there and somebody's sitting in the gazebo, I'd like another place where, I could sit down at a table or a bench, still up at that level, instead of going back to the same.
I don't see that. I see a couple of people. There's a group there that plays mahjong, and then there's people that go up and have lunch at the same time.
Well, I'm thinking if
No,
you're
I
probably
mean,
with a
they're
couple of
there,
groups,
and they have,
if you're with your friends and there's another, like I was there, like I said, Monday, and I thought, I reflected on it, I thought, gee, if there was somebody else sitting up here, like, you know, I'd go up there, like, am I gonna feel like I have to have a conversation with that person, or it's like, you know, it's kind of a little, like if you're there with your, you know, if Randy and I go there and you two guys are there and we have our own, I think it's a little different. So I do think there's some merit to that, because it's not a huge space, and I do think there's some merit to it. Something to it, but anyway, so that's, here, I think what we're saying is we're flexible, right? So the next, so those were basically those 2 points. The next is 2 piers. Are these going to be for standing and fishing, or just to protect the sand? So I think they're reflecting on the
the
jetties.
existing 2 jetties.
Yeah.
Because I
So-
didn't even understand what that was.
I didn't remember that honestly coming up in any significant way, but so,
In the early days, there was this.
no, I meant in the meeting, you know.
Yeah.
But I don't think they're piers, are they?
No,
Maybe
they're-
there's just
no,
a
they're
misunderstanding
jetties.
of what they are.
The
I think they were
breakwaters,
just the
they-
existing
Well,
breakwaters.
we talked about piers, and we gave up on those a long
Exactly right.
time
Yeah,
ago.
we were gonna.
Just about a year ago, you know, but
Right.
Putting it
maybe
there.
they're still in the drawings, or.
No, they're
No,
not.
they're not.
Well,
But I
Let's just
think
go
there
on.
could be a misconception around what these were, because I remember in this committee, when we were talking about it initially, there was a misperception of what they were. So it might be worth just clarifying with them that what
Yeah.
we're talking about here are not piers.
No, and Neil did clarify that in the meeting.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay.
People do fish off of them.
Oh, I see, because they walk out on the.
They walk
yeah,
out,
Okay.
it's not a smooth top.
Well, I think what they were asking is, you know,
Off, I think, it's
Well,
like,
it's
I mean,
during
you're not
the
supposed
summer
to
when-
fish off of them.
Right.
Yeah, when the lifeguards are there, there's no fishing there, and you're not supposed to be on there, so.
so I think we're all in agreement, like, we're not attempting to do anything with those. or-
No, they're very hazardous.
Yeah.
And very expensive.
We probably also want to clarify what are ADA requirements and what are desires to enhance accessibility. I mean, we know there's ADA specific parking requirements. We know with regard to when we create a building,
Yeah.
there are ADA requirements. I don't know, and that does we need to know, because I don't think any of us are a subject matter expert, what other requirements there are, so we need to split out
Yeah.
what's an actual requirement to be in compliance with the regulation,
I
and
think
what
it-
is what we would like to do to make as many parts of the property inclusive as possible, and then that's a balancing decision.
As it relates to the jetties, you know, as Martha said, there's signs there that says, you know,
Exactly.
do not use, so you don't
Yeah.
have to bring those into
Right,
ADA
that's what I was
compliance.
saying. Yeah,
Yeah, my understanding, to answer the question, and I think they touched on this, is that, to your point, the only requirements are on the new building, which I guess is also part of, well, the new building will need to be ADA
the
compliant.
renovated bathroom.
The renovated bathroom, and then the parking lot, and anything else we're doing is kind of discretionary.
It's
not
a discretionary
yeah.
decision on how much we want to do to make various parts of the park accessible, maximize the
Yeah,
accessibility.
and I think
It's a
they,
balancing act.
I think they're kind of observing that and kind of appreciative of that. So the next item here, plantings and new trees will be key, so please include a landscape plan and lighting plan with formal application. So the formal application will be December, and there's some work that has to be done by Dan
Right,
and company.
and Pam just left. Maybe Laura, you can answer this. Last year or 2 years ago, the tree conservatory people wanted to plant trees down at the beach. They offered us 8 or 9 trees at some point, and they did plant some over by the picnic area, which took very, very well. I'm wondering, since we're not doing anything but expanding the front beach, if it's possible to ask them to plant those trees along the front South Beach, along the South Beach now, because they planted them in the fall, and they would take, and we'd have that piece of this puzzle done if they're still willing to donate those trees to us. Because, and that have the same type of tree that they did down in the picnic area, because they really took well. Because we're not doing anything in that line where the trees are, except taking the stumps out that were left. And if we could do that now.
So the trees would go in the same, there's no movement of the trees based on the plan?
No, the tree, there's 3 trees and one kind of sick looking tree. They are now. And then there's the 3 trees around the gazebo that are gonna stay. So if the commission could, I was gonna try and ask that at your last meeting, but.
Can I make a suggestion?
It's not a bad idea.
Yeah, I think it's a good
Yeah,
idea.
and then it would be, they'd be there and we could at least use them next summer, because this is not, we don't know where this.
Yeah, I would just suggest what we'll do is we'll get Dan in the loop so that he kind of incorporates whatever we're doing, so that these
Right.
guys don't just show up and dump stuff off the back of a truck and plant it somewhere that Dan might
Right.
feel is not the
Right,
best
I mean, it's
place.
kind of
No, I
self-explanatory.
understand, I'm
Those
just
are the
saying,
well.
yeah,
I mean, we're not gonna do one over here
We're
and
just-
one over there.
coordinate.
You can probably vision that very quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, the question is the offer still good?
Yeah, that's
And
number
can they
one.
do it
Right,
this fall? And
Yes.
yeah, and or we'll do it.
because now would be planting season, right?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
thank you.
That's a great suggestion. Okay, so that's the trees. And it's also a reflection here that they are expecting, when we go back with the formal application, that we have a fully kind of baked, proposed landscape plan.
And a lighting plan, which we've never really discussed.
No, we haven't talked about that at all.
So I don't know what exactly.
Well, that would be something we could go back to Neil and say we need to start thinking about.
Yeah, Neil and Dan,
Yeah.
come back to us with recommendations.
Are there streetlights on that parking lot now? There are, aren't there?
On the roadside.
Oh, just the roadside?
It's very dark in there.
There's nothing in the middle of the park.
Okay.
Nothing.
You
That
don't think
answers
they
my
were,
question.
you don't think they were referring to the elevated building
I'm sure
and the
that-
lighting
yeah.
around that?
I think
Yeah,
part,
I-
part
It's
of
both, it's
it,
both,
I'm
yeah,
sure they're referring to that.
yeah.
both.
So we're gonna light the perimeter along the edge of the beach. I mean, we don't now, right?
Nope.
And is there any lighting over where the picnic area is?
No, it's really dark.
Right, and they're gonna wanna know, I can understand why they would wanna know what the lighting plan is.
Yeah.
Do we know what the requirements for lighting are?
Well, what does that mean?
Well, you know, again,
What code?
What's
what's,
the-
are there, right, what's,
So that has to be sorted out, I think.
I think the year-round capability of the proposed building implies more use of the property.
I think that's accurate.
Like at this time of year,
Mhm.
you know, and as well as later on.
That's accurate, yeah, I think that's the case. And it kind of touches on also that they are asking for some additional information just on kind of the proposed uses, the programming and proposed uses here. We'll get to that in a second, but, so that's plantings and lightings. The next is also request detailed elevation plans with formal application that include ground level views and site projections from the parking lot and the road. So they're just asking for additional detail on the plans and the elevations and kind of different views from different angles.
So reasonable.
Yeah, I think that's,
They'd have to do that anyway.
yeah,
It's on the computer.
exactly.
They can rotate it around.
Right, and then the next is, would like to request more information, background on the mandate for uses and activities, which would better set the stage for how the design came to fruition. So here they're asking for kind of an understanding of what the use cases are, the programming requirements. So they've got a couple of bullets under that. So what were findings on a community room, and what are seasonal plans for use of one? Board proposed alternate idea of a more open second-story structure, not restricted by a community room that may or may not be operable in the winter. So they're looking for kind of an explanation and a justification for why it's designed as it is and how it will be used. The next item is more clarity on the records of community use at Weed Beach, in addition to the number of people who passed through the Pear Tree entrance gate during the summer. Perhaps this might help design decisions on the community room and parking lot size.
You don't really, nobody's counting cars.
Well, we did one, I guess, real measurement. We attempted to do a second with Westcog, and that's when the camera got stolen. So I think this might be something that we'll just have to defer to and do another count once we get back into the season. You know, before that can be really.
now in December.
No, I mean, it's irrelevant now, but I mean, once we, so that'll just have to be explained.
Yeah,
So
we know
it'll
how
be-
many, the office will know how many daily parking passes
Yeah.
are sold.
Yeah. I mean, we do have accurate accounts for,
Such a small
That's not
number.
gonna
We're-
tell
But that's not gonna
Usage,
tell us a
just
lot.
No.
They're not counting, the guards aren't counting
We had accurate counts for one day, and that's July 13th, and that's from Westcog.
But yellow cards aren't counting how many people with their stickers.
No, we sell, what, 2,000 stickers?
No, more like 4,000, I think.
But I think it's a good point.
4,000 stickers.
It's a good point. It would have
I
been
mean,
nice.
It's 100 times the number of parking spots. It's
Right.
not a very good indicator.
Yeah. But what they also talked about is maybe just instead of having a room up there that we heat in the wintertime and not heat it and maybe just do, and not have a roof up there, but just do a deck. And have just a decking up there instead of having a community space room up there. So that came up too.
Yeah.
I think that's
Good
an
question.
easy one to talk through though, because
Yeah.
Neil did a plan right now.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Because we looked at it, we looked at one option without a community room, just.
Yeah, my sense is the spirit of the question was they were just trying to understand the thinking that went into why it is the way it is at the moment. And I think, you know, they deserve an answer in terms of like what the thinking is on how it would be used. I think they, you know what, I made some comments actually, I captured some of their comments, so just maybe while we're on this. I think, let's just see, all the way around. Oh, so one of the members said the new building with the decks all the way around was, provided beautiful views. I think there was kind of a general sense that people liked kind of the idea of the elevated, general sense that there was a kind of an appreciation, I think, for the elevated structure. I think anybody really pushed back on it, but I think there was just a question on like, okay, so you guys are proposing an enclosed space, what do you need it for? You know, like what's the
Yeah,
justification?
Pam's
for it?
been pulling together
Yeah.
several years worth of history on the Wheat Beach
That's great.
rentals.
And then the last element here was, in terms of this, once again, this is their informal feedback, was a request for getting information on tide records, land erosion maps, projections for rising sea level, parking engineering plan that would help in understanding how the revised parking lot will be situated as it relates to the building and the beach. So, once again, just kind of clarifying for their benefit, kind of the larger context in which this is all sitting. So, I thought it was a great meeting. I thought, you know, the feedback is really, I think, really valuable now that we're kind of into that
There was one more
stage.
comment that they made, and that was about, which isn't on here, was about the pavers in the middle of the parking lot.
No, there's something here. That's what I'm supposed to do.
I didn't see it. Where was it?
No paving of the parking, there was a picnic area, so.
Yeah, they thought that having the brick in the middle of the parking lot was taking away. They just didn't seem to like too many colors going on, right, Mike? And
I think,
they
yeah, it was
talked
kind of
about
the-
that as
yeah.
maybe just leaving it the blacktop
Yeah, I mean, I think the way
instead of doing that.
my read was like they really were focused on just trying to kind of create like a harmony of colors and not to have
Right.
too many different things going on. I think Neil did explain that it could provide an opportunity for kind of a more permeable surface or just breaking up some of the blacktop so it's not just pure blacktop throughout, but
But they did
Yeah.
mention that.
yeah. So,
didn't have
so that was that.
Interesting,
So,
that's the one that I actually feel like just a straight blacktop bugs me, so wouldn't it be
I
nice
feel
to
the
have
same way.
something that softens it a little bit?
yeah. I mean, I would have, I don't know if it's even workable, but I would have liked maybe
I'd like
just,
to understand more of the maintenance of that.
Yeah.
Relative, fair enough, that's reasonable.
Well, if it-
Blacktop and striping is easy.
that's a good point.
One of the things we had talked about when we were looking at an early plan with the pavers is that the sand can get in the cracks. And you could get unevenness of them. Now granted, they're not here sand, but if the sand is washed out during a major storm or something or other.
I
Also,
thought Neil addressed that with the new materials, but that wasn't an issue.
Gravel.
depending also on freezing and thawing, you have pavers in there, with the water getting underneath in the wintertime, they're going to heave. That's
I think
probably-
it's more of an artistic approach than a reality approach. I mean, they look very nice, but I'm concerned about the maintenance over a period of time.
That's fair. I was thinking of the aesthetics.
No, they look
Me
nice.
too.
I mean,
Yeah,
Snowplows do work in
Yeah.
that lot,
I know,
you know, and
but again, if it's
they can
heated,
knock them loose. You know.
no, but if it gets in there, freezes, and we lose some of the things that come up, and you got a snowplow,
I heard
you
you.
just lost the brick.
Well, I might also point out they're darn expensive.
Mhm.
Again, it's an artistic view. An artist's view, I should say.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So maybe if I just recap the items that I think we felt were flexible on. So that's on the colors, the blue's the blue thing. On the brick, right, the colors on the brick. And I think we're kind of in agreement with their idea of maybe more harmonious color schemes. The size of, the amount of paving in the picnic area for handicap accessibility, we're saying we're flexible on that. And also the decking around the gazebo. Did I miss anything? And the ramps and the
Ramps.
Yeah,
Texture in the side.
right.
The
but-
text, yeah.
Yeah, but there, once again, I think we're saying that Neil's got to really come back to us on what's kind of doable in terms of satisfying the FEMA requirement for it to be breakaway also. Yeah, I think there was also, unfortunately, I know Martha, you were there, and unfortunately there was some confusion about whether we could actually even get into the meeting or not. So, we hung around, and then I think maybe Dave kind of took pity on us that we were there at 10 o'clock and let us into the meeting, but I thought it was good.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Good suggestion, Cheryl, to go through all of that. So, any other reflections on maybe where we're at this stage, or anybody, maybe we want to just do a quick pass around the table, Martha, anything else from you?
Well, I was just looking at your PER chart or your CPM chart, whatever it is here on the various movements, but, are we doing any borings in the sand at all? Because, on the Public Works garage, he
Yeah.
did kind of a write-up on, important steps, and he says you can't test for hazardous materials or soil, whatever the soil needs are for these piers. But you aren't going to have good cost estimates unless you know how far down you have to go.
Yeah,
So I think it's,
I think the test borings would come when he gets into the design phase.
I think the answer is yes.
now are we calling the design phase, is that the construction drawings?
Construction and engineering. He has talked to somebody from TED.
Right, but so my understanding of the phasing here is we're just kind of finishing up programming and schematics, so like use case, what are we doing, and the design around that. The next stage is, I think when we get into the discussion around design drawings are not the construction drawings, it's around materials, flooring materials, wall materials, latches, all that stuff that of course will have an effect on the budget, right? And then once we get past that, and as we're working through the approval stages, then we get into the I think we get to the construction drawing stage only once we've gotten past that. And I think to your point, I know Neil has talked about borings, and I know he's talked about that being an unknown in terms of, like what the implication might be for cost based upon what we find.
That'll have to be done before the engineer can design the structure.
Right, not just,
So it's,
I mean, you may, if you did a boring now, you may discover that, I don't know, what, you have to go down 30 feet or something, and that might have huge implications
Absolutely.
for cost,
Yeah.
and how many piers you would have to put in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
No.
I don't know, I mean, I'm not an expert on this,
But I do know he's
I think
aware of
the
that, and he
earlier
knows he
the
has to do
better,
that.
Probably, in terms of,
Well, I think the first thing he's waiting for is just to
you
kind
want
of
to
get
get through
it,
the ZBA, I
yeah,
guess.
to decide whether or not we can actually put the building where he's planning on it. So that's a great point.
Could someone remind me where we stand on where we ended up on drainage for the parking lot? I know we talked about mitigation of flooding through changing the storm drain, but just wondered where we ended up on that.
We still want to get it fixed.
Just,
I don't think it's been fixed, has it?
No, it's,
Existing drain?
The,
the check valve has not been fixed. And so,
was there any thought on how much that will mitigate the drainage issue, or?
It's only gonna stop the puddle that goes in the middle of the parking lot.
Okay.
That's about all it's gonna stop. It's not gonna stop the flooding from coming over the beach and going into the major parking lot. It's not gonna stop if a major storm comes and the parking lot floods and it goes into the road. It's not gonna stop that. This check valve will only stop
The puddling.
the puddling in the parking lot, basically.
Yeah, I mean,
And if we could get that done now,
yes.
It would give us
Move
an
forward,
opportunity
then
to
it-
see.
because then it'll be there, well, we're gonna expand that beach down that far.
Yeah, well, actually, that's at that kind of choke point.
It's right
where
at that
kind of like-
end of the thing.
Yeah, so,
And if that doesn't help, where is it? End of where? Do we know where it is?
if you have the site plan, it's
The
at
drain?
it's at the point at which the
Yeah.
beach kind of really narrows on kind of angles, so
Right.
there may have to be some work done.
It's
on it,
almost
depending on-
opposite where you drive in, so pretty
I
much.
believe Pam's already engaged a Gentile on this.
Correct.
Yeah.
To see, you know, and ask that specific question as to
Yeah.
whether is that something we could,
Yeah, I think there's been a lot, that's been written and said suggesting that, you know, there's a claim that somebody on this committee has made that that's the sole source of flooding at the beach. I haven't heard anybody say that, you know, like in my metaphor that I've been using, it's kind of like the hole in the hull of a boat, you know, and it's contributing to it and it's not making it any better. So, you know, those situations on a sunny day when the water doesn't even breach, tide rises, the water doesn't even breach the curb, it's coming up out of that. And I guess we could characterize it as a puddle, but it's a very, very big puddle that forms. And also, you know, in real flood conditions, it's not making things better. It's actually contributing to making things worse because water's actually fountaining up out of that thing. You know?
I've been thinking about that, and I think there's one good thing about the faulty drain, and that is it gives us a warning of impending flooding. If the check valve works perfectly, nobody's going to see, you know, that the beach is about to flood.
Yeah. I guess you'll see it coming up the boat ramp.
I don't
It's
think.
never, it's
Yeah, if
never
you're
Doesn't
going-
come out the boat.
No,
never
it's
come up the boat ramp into the parking lot, in a,
You see it coming over
in a
the beach.
hurricane or something, but it comes over the beach, and it comes over the West Beach first, right?
You lose the whole West Street.
I mean, we've survived to date, I mean, with the flooding. I mean, there are days when the high tide is exceptionally high, and there are days when it's a high tide, but it's moderate, so.
And there were
nothing you can do about it.
in the last month or so, there were instances where it flooded on what seemed to be a perfectly sunny day.
Well, right, but it was particularly high tide.
Right, but in those days, you had that super harvest moon, and you had a major nor'easter offshore, which was pushing all this water into the New York Harbor
And it's even
and
worse,
pushing
yeah.
it down Long Island Sound, and that's why it flooded an hour and a half before high tide, because that water was just forced up in there. So those things happen, and it's always gonna flood.
But the tide charts only tell you what might be, not what it actually will
Well,
be.
it's a function of weather.
Yeah, I think as we're learning, it's not only the tide charts, it's the phases of the moon, and it's, you know, like, it's, you know, somebody.
Well, I
I
think
think
those
the tide
are
charts take
part of the
into
tide
account
charts.
those.
You know, the
Yeah.
tide charts vary quite a lot.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's interesting, they ask for tide records. I don't think there are any tide records.
No, I-
There's tide charts, which are predictions, but, you know,
Nobody's keeping
actual tides,
Yeah,
I know of no records.
I don't know.
Land erosion maps, I don't know what an erosion map is.
Well, it doesn't sound like we have erosion, we're gaining sand, it sounds like.
and there's those pictures that the woman at DEP said that they had
Yes.
that covered a number of years.
Yeah.
One thing that we have gotten confirmation on from Jeremy, and Martha, I know you've raised this in the past, is before we go to P&Z, we'll have to bring in a coastal consultant to do a kind of a coastal engine. I don't know if it's a coastal engineering review. We'll have to look into that. If you go back and you look at the information that I forwarded along on the 78 ZBA application, you'll see a write-up by a fellow by the name of Dave Emerson. Don't know if anybody in the room knows who Dave Emerson is, but he was kind of the coastal consultant that was brought into that application at the time, and he did a page and a half write-up on his findings. And so we now have confirmation that that will be required for P&Z.
Okay.
So we'll do that, and we'll have to, you know, we'll identify an individual. We've got an inquiry into Dan Biggs to understand, you know, the
Is
availability.
that the town or is that part of Neil's service?
Well, we have to find out whether or not, we're trying to understand now, because once again, this has just kind of come up within the last 24 hours, but in terms of whether it's something that Dan thinks he signed up for, or, we'll have to do separately.
You're trying to decide, okay. I was gonna say, I think, and I don't remember the name of the firm, but one of the firms that submitted a bid was a coastal engineering firm, and I
Yeah,
had a favorable impression.
yeah, and there are some
I
folks
see what
around.
you're saying, is that included in the one?
Right, I guess we'll have to give
Price.
Dan the opportunity to answer that. And to your point, there's names that are, I went back today and looked at those bids and identified some of those names that are in there that are subcontractors.
Seymour or something?
Well, it's like various names, but
Yeah, and there were two
Race
that
Coast.
Jeremy and Ed Gentile particularly liked.
yeah. So once we get to this stage, we'll kind of get the sense of folks. And I guess what I'd like to ask, now that since we're on it, I'd like to suggest, because there may be a window between when we meet again, and the plan is to go to P&Z in the middle of January. So what I'd like to ask, if it's okay with the committee, is that maybe Martha, you, I, and Randy, we'll get some names, and we'll look those over, and maybe on behalf of the committee, if you guys will allow us, rather than to kind of have a special committee meeting or something, we can just figure out if we're satisfied with. So there's no objections to that. Maybe just kind of have this small sub-team.
We just need to check to make sure it's not part of the original proposal.
Yeah, that's happening right now.
Well, we do have 2 meetings scheduled for November, but I want to kind of say something here. After the RTM meeting the other night, and Lori spoke and Mike spoke, and they did a great job. And with all of the emails as an RTM member I'm getting, and letters and phone calls, and with all of the questions that I was asked after the RTM meeting on Monday night, I've sat down and I've started to really think long and hard about all of this. And I'd like to know if there's some way we can make some compromises to move this forward. Because I fear right now, if this is to go in this, as this plan is, I fear that it's not going to pass the RTM. And I know it's out there in a lot of people's minds. And I think that the community has spoken loud and clear. There's a lot of positive information in all those emails that they want this bathhouse fixed up, and they want a lot of things that are on the list. But the biggest thing that people, I'm hearing and seeing from people is the flexible space, size of the building, and I know Neil has done a terrific job in cutting it down as best he could and making it smaller square footage wise and everything. But I'd like us to keep our meetings for November, to keep discussing this and see if there's some way we can make this work and move forward. Because if this goes all the way to the RTM and it doesn't pass, we have nothing. If we try and make a compromise on this building, and Lori had mentioned it in your speech to the RTM, moratorium on using the building for 3 years, I thought about that too. And I thought, well, we're gonna have the heat, the pipes going up there, and everything will be there. So it's just prolonging everything until 3 years, in my opinion. So I'd like to know how everybody feels about this, because the community is speaking loud and clear. And we need to start to, I think we need to start to listen and see what we can come up with, and see somehow we can make some kind of a compromise on some of this.
I would suggest that, yes, the community is speaking loud and clear, but it's not representing the entire town of Darien. It's a select group of people that are raising voices.
Well,
We have already been through this before, and we have voted to move forward. I don't think we need to take a step backwards and try to work on a separate design until we're told that we can't go forward, and then we'll do a compromise. Then we'll do the compromise. But it doesn't make sense to stop a process to do Plan B just in case we need Plan B, when we don't know whether we're gonna get through Plan A or not.
But if we go through Plan A, and we go through all the ZBA and everybody else, and we get to the RTM, and the RTM votes no, then we have to start the whole process over again.
We don't have to
We
start the
don't
whole
get the-
process.
It's over.
We don't, it's done.
It's over.
It's over. It's over.
Well, then-
That's it.
We won't get the boat ramp. We won't get the expanded beach of 8 feet and 5 feet. We won't get handicapped accessible areas. We won't get anything on this design. We get nothing. And I, for one, have worked very hard to try and get Pear 2 on the map over the years. And not just me, the RTM of my committee, which changes every year. As we all know that we are elected and we are on RTM different committees. We get nothing. If we go to the RTM as a whole package, that's it. Then we get disband, or the Board of Selectmen decides to keep all of us intact, and we start over again. That's another 2 years. In the meantime, we still have god-awful bathrooms, and we don't have clean sand, we don't have the boat ramp, and that'll take another 2 years. So do we sit here and say to ourselves, and I'm not asking for a decision tonight, but I think we should think about some sort of compromise. And what you said about it's not representing the whole town. The whole town is never, ever going to be represented. It was never representative even when we went to grade level schools. And we closed homeschool. And that's a bigger issue than a beach. So you're not going to get 20,000 people coming out to these meetings. God help us if we did. But I'm just saying, we need to think. I'd like us to think. I'm trying to do a survey right now myself of some of my friends that I know and colleagues and people in town to say, what if, I asked the question, if we come up, what would be your compromise? What would you compromise on this plan? So far, I'm hearing the buildings is the biggest problem. Everybody wants everything else. Everybody wants everything. All the letters we've got wants everything else. The boat ramp is right there.
So Cheryl, I just want to point out one thing. I feel like that the actual proposal that has gone forward does represent a significant amount of compromise and a significant amount of
Yes.
hearing what people had to say.
A lot of
We
it
have
does.
eliminated a number of things that we've heard opposition around, that we've eliminated dunes, we've eliminated sidewalks, we've taken away boardwalks from the beach. Many of the things that were originally proposed under the attempts to meet the charge of the PNC have been eliminated in response to the community's voice and in response to the discussions that we've had here. So I feel like putting it out there that this doesn't represent a compromise already would be actually not quite accurate.
I agree.
And so we are still hearing opposition to some elements of this plan, and I think a lot of the comments that Mike talked about tonight in response to the preliminary feedback to the proposal also indicates that there is flexibility on a number of points. So I would have to say that I agree with moving forward to see the reaction to this plan, because I think the plan really already represents a tremendous amount of compromise. And I also think that to try to get to all the things that everybody says they want in all the letters that we're receiving are not, we found them to be not doable under the actual dollars that we had to spend on the building. So getting all those things that everybody wants, we didn't come up with a plan on how to do that.
I don't understand what you mean. I mean, the letters that I'm seeing as Cheryl stated, people are in favor of sprucing up the beach. They're not in favor of the elevated structure. I mean, that, every letter categorically, and I don't think they're asking for other expensive items. I haven't heard of any requests for, I don't know what, to what are you referring?
Well, I'm thinking we still want to upgrade the bathrooms and retain the snack bar and spruce up the building.
Right.
And I don't remember our seeing an ability to do that in the budget that we had. I'm
Well,
correct me
I
if I'm
don't
wrong.
think we have thoroughly investigated
We
that.
addressed that very early, that $100,000 wasn't gonna go far enough to
But you
totally
know, we
spruce up that building.
never even attempted to make an estimate. Now, I know the group hired a contractor to go through the building. They discovered no cracks. They said it was structurally sound. And his estimate was to put in new fixtures and clean up the bathhouse. No changes to the roof line or anything. I understand was about $40,000. And another thing, you know, I think new fixtures, new sinks, you know, just generally sprucing it up. We're not moving walls or anything, you know, probably replacing the shower stalls with cleaner, you know, one-piece items. I mean, I don't know, I wasn't part of this tour, but this is what I've heard, for $40,000. But, you know, this committee has never investigated that. And also, I look at this building, this bathhouse that's being proposed, and frankly, I'm really skeptical it can be done for $90,000. And I remember Jeremy's warning, he said, you know, you're foolish to spend your whole budget the first year, because if some event takes place and you have to repair the building, you've shot your budget. So we could be in a situation where we redo this, you know, come up with this small redone bathroom, shooting our entire budget. The next year a storm knocks it out. We've got nothing.
Let me take a crack at it. So first off, and Cheryl and I had a chance to chat a little bit yesterday also, and I thought it was a great conversation. So here are my thoughts. So first off, I think we're finally at the stage, and just only recently, where we have something that we're in a position to help the larger community really understand what we're attempting to do here. So we have schematics, we have a model, we have a budget, we have an FAQ. It's taken us a while to get there, but in advance of getting there, there's been a dialogue, a parallel dialogue about what we're attempting to do that, in my opinion, doesn't really marry up to the reality of it. So I almost feel as though for a period of time there's been kind of two parallel tracks or almost two parallel universes in terms of what we're up to here. There's been a description of things like, just an example of it, like we're creating a scenario where we're going to increase the level of traffic at the beach and increase activity at the beach and spoil the tranquil nature of the beach. Why do I say that's a parallel universe? Because the flip side of that is we're actually limiting the number of parking spots at the beach. So I've had difficulty trying to reconcile the two dialogues. I'm working really hard on it. In fact, nowadays it's the only thing I think about for the most part, from morning till night. So there's been a whole series of kind of comments that are being made. They're being reflected in letters. They're being reflected in comments that, from my perspective, don't really accurately reflect what we're up to here. So I feel we've only reached a point now, and as an example, I think, you know, the presentation to the RTM the other evening was an important milestone because we had an opportunity to get up and put a presentation up and have some comment and make some commentary on it. So my view in terms of, you know, what the community is really feeling, I said this many meetings ago, I don't have a clue. You know, I'm really in uncharted territory. You know, there's this whole view of the silent majority out there. I don't know if there is or there isn't. But I think in terms of the work that the committee's doing, I think we need to allow that to progress. So now we're at the approval stage. And through the approval process, as you see, we just read through a whole series of comments and we've had a civil discussion around, okay, you know, they've given us feedback and we're flexible on that. So my feeling is, and I always went into this right from the outset expecting there would be compromise. I mean, you know, like none of us are, you know, like, or no one's in a position to just say it's this way or the highway. So I feel that the process has baked into it the expectation that there has to be, we have an obligation to communicate clearly to the community what we're doing here. And I think, as I said, I think we're only at that stage. I think that's facilitated further by the ARB, by the meeting with ZBA, by planning and zoning. We'll get up to Board of Selectmen. So I understand your concern that maybe we'll get to the end of this and it'll get rejected. My expectation's a little different. I'm expecting that by the time we get to the end of it, what we're ending up with is something that's probably going to be quite a bit different from what we started with, what we have right now. And I'm completely comfortable with that. What I'm not comfortable with is this dialogue that's a parallel dialogue that's perpetuating information that's not accurate, for the sake of trying to derail a process that I think is a well-defined process that has served this community very, very well for a very long time. So I'm absolutely in favor. I'm on the record. I'm completely in favor of compromise. I'm available. In fact, I've only had one individual in the entire town who's objecting to what we're doing reach out to me and have a conversation with me for an explanation about what we're doing. To actually send me a note and say, are you available to have a conversation with me? And we had a conversation over the telephone, and I felt that was a good conversation. So my only point is I think we're all available, but I feel as though I'm uncomfortable with the implication that, the process doesn't work. I think the process should work very well. It's worked very well in many other things here. And I think we need to let the process proceed. And I think we're at that stage of the process where the building committee has done pretty much everything we can do. We have a model, we have plans, we have elevations, we have a budget. We'll have to stand behind that budget at some point. Maybe that budget's inaccurate. But now let the process flow. I mean, there are people here in this town who are, on other approval bodies, land use bodies, that are going to weigh in. And I think they feel as though they're representing the voice of the community. I think that's why they feel they're in those roles. So I think, through that proxy vote, we'll get feedback. And once again, I feel a very, very heavy obligation to make sure we're communicating clearly. And I'm willing to have a conversation with anybody to explain what we're up to. And I'm also willing to call people on it if I think there's information that's being disseminated that's not accurate. And I feel there's a lot of that that's gone on. I'm uncomfortable with it because it doesn't reflect at all what we've been up to here. And it's just making me feel more firmly that we have to let the process flow. And if somebody feels as though, with a higher pay grade than me, that opinion isn't relevant, then they can find somebody else to do this. But that's the way I feel about it.
What about rental space? What about putting the moratorium on the rental space upstairs?
Completely in favor of it.
When we talked yesterday about the rental space, you had said to me that you thought maybe we would do away with the rental space.
Well, I said I'm open to the idea of putting it on hold.
Of compromising, of that being a compromise.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm in favor of that too.
Well,
Not having a rental space.
If you end
No,
up building this building,
No, you're
why
building
are you
this,
going to have a moratorium on the space
you're
that you
building,
built?
we're building the building for the community to use.
It's not a moratorium on a space,
It's not permanent space, as we talked about the last time. It's for space for people that want to go upstairs, have some nice views. If they get too hot, there'll be a room that doesn't have sun available to it.
Yeah, this is what
And it's
confuses.
I just find it hard to believe that all the letters that we're receiving doesn't give anybody pause on this committee that, do we need to think this a little bit?
Well, here's what I find.
We've already thought about it, we've
Well,
moved
you know
forward,
what?
and as
You
Mike
know
has
what?
said,
We
Yes, you're
haven't
right,
thought
Tom.
about it to the extent that Pam is having to pull together the reason for the seasonal use and to
And-
show some
and
dollars.
that's great, and I'm glad she's doing that, and if the answer comes
But
back, we
we've
don't
gone
need
this
it.
far and haven't had that.
But we're not doing anything, we're not
Hold on, Martha, that's
we're not
absolutely.
building plans,
No,
we're
hold
not
on,
building now.
Please, that's completely inaccurate. We've been together a year, and we've had the discussion multiple times in terms of what we anticipate the use of that space, what that space would be used for. So I'm not sure what, I don't
Well, I mean, to
understand.
get out of the sun and to have it as rental
Well,
space.
no, so here's the thing, those
I mean,
buildings
the
were.
public doesn't seem to be buying it though.
Well,
I mean,
there's a
doesn't
group of people who are not buying it, but once
But
again,
now I have to say,
Look.
this has now appeared in the paper, it's well publicized, maybe you could have argued early on in the process, people didn't know much about the project, but there were a certain few who responded. It is wide out there now,
It's in the ad.
and there's plenty of opportunity to send letters in support, and we've gotten a handful in support, but we've gotten a bushel full opposed. Doesn't that give anybody pause to think about this?
And to your point, Tom, you're right. We did move forward on this. But since we have moved forward, we're getting more and more feedback.
And that's very welcome.
And
And as Mike has said, as we move down this process, we will be looking at some of those concerns. If the, whatever comes back and says you can't do a community room, then that's fine. Or, a rental room, that's fine.
okay.
But to
I
stop
said
the
what I had to
process,
say.
and as
I'm
I
not gonna
talked to,
dwell on
I
this.
talked to Martha before, the architect, the team that's been doing it has been given us a quote to do X, for X amount of money.
Well, I don't understand, what's the fear amongst the members of the committee to allow the process to continue to completion? What's the fear?
Because you may end up with nothing, or I feel like we're wasting,
we will-
if it's, why
if you
have
feel
the
you're wasting your
architect go
time-
through drawing all these plans if the public doesn't want it?
Well, once again, I think it's, from my perspective, the jury's out whether the public wants it or not. This is a town that's made up of...
How do you say the jury is out?
Because there's
Why-
22,000 people in town, and we've heard from a good number. By the way, I'm very impressed with the feedback. I've read every letter that I've gotten.
And they haven't been formed.
I've read every letter that I've gotten. We've made every effort to reflect as much as we possibly could, changes in the plans based upon the feedback we've gotten. But I have, first of all, we haven't gotten a letter from everybody in town. You seem to be willing to suggest that there's a proxy vote here that represents the vote of the entire community, and I don't know, I'm not in a position where I can say
I'm just saying
that.
now, it's been well publicized, and people who support it have every opportunity to send letters into us and say, great job, I want you to put
Look,
this
I think that's a red
elevated
herring.
space."
You know that's a red herring, because I think
I've been
it's
on other projects, and
but I
I
think
must say.
it's a
I've
well-known
seen
phenomenon,
this
Martha, and you know
letters.
this as well as I do, that, the folks who are passionately against something are the ones who make sure their voices are heard, and those who tend to be either busy doing other things, or may not necessarily want to get up in a room and get shouted down, or send a letter to the editor and be ridiculed for the letter that they sent to the
Well, now,
editor.
I have to tell you, it's harder to speak out against something than it is to support it.
I
I think you're wrong about that.
I don't
No,
know.
absolutely. I'm very uncomfortable speaking out all the time, but I feel strongly about it.
Getting back to the point so we can move on to the subject.
Yes.
If we find out in the review cycles that we're going through that this puppy ain't gonna work, then we have the opportunity to redesign and rethink some of the aspects of it.
You do, but it may get through, and they may approve the structure, but the public still may not want it, but we'll forge ahead with it.
The RTM represents the entire town, and they're the final say.
Right.
So if the RTM votes to accept the proposal to move forward with it, then they're thinking about what the entire town looks like wants, not just a group of people that
Right,
aren't.
but
And that's
I'm-
the final
Yeah.
arbiter. But we have many steps to get there, and we should get a sense that this dog isn't gonna hunt, or the way it's designed isn't gonna work for what's going on. And that's the process that we have to follow, and that's the process we agreed to when we voted last week, or last time we met.
So Martha and Cheryl, as RTM members, how do you gather information from your constituents? I've lived in the same home for 30 years. I have never once had an RTM member, even the ones I know personally, approach me on any topic in town to ask what my,
Well, I'll tell you,
So I'm just
RTM
curious.
members' phone numbers are listed, and I've actually
There are
been
no email
advocating
addresses
for,
posted.
I've been advocating for several years that all RTM members should have
and I think
town
that's.
email addresses, and I happen to have a town email address,
not
and I
posted.
happen at
Oh,
budget
it is.
time,
Is
I
it
do
posted now?
receive letters from constituents.
Because I've been looking in most of my district.
And you can
they're not
go,
posted.
pardon me?
But I've looked in the past and I've not noticed they're posted, but I'm just curious how you, I mean, clearly you're getting feedback from the friends and you people you ask, but I'm just really curious, because I asked some of the young families in my neighborhood, do you know about this? Do you know who your RTM members are? And like, no.
Well, it takes people to become a little active too. I mean.
But I know, but
No, I mean,
they're
I
raising
agree.
5
Listen,
kids
I
and-
think that.
Okay, so I just think
I
it's
think
an
it's
issue in town.
important, I have my email, town email published, and people are free to contact me, and as I said, I've received letters at budget time and on other issues from people, and if I've got their email, I'm able to respond to them.
I do think the RTM as a body could work on that.
I
really
agree.
work on that.
I
Whether
we
whether
have-
the district members drop by
I
the
think we're getting a
streets,
little-
we're getting.
Yeah, we're getting a little off track
Which
here.
we are all
So,
listed under,
yeah, so look here.
Mr.
May I-
Chairman,
Well, you know, as a
Chairman,
matter of fact, actually,
Can,
our
Mr. Chairman, can we
chairman,
just table this discussion?
well,
We've-
we just
we've-
finished.
No, I think we're done. We've talked about this ad nauseum. We've got other things we need to talk about tonight. We voted to move forward with the project, and we need to let the process happen.
Okay,
And we will have checkpoints along the way.
4 years.
So, that's fine. If it's 4 years, it's 4 years.
Well,
That's the
no, you
process.
seem to think if it's turned down, that the building committee will be reconstituted. I don't think there's any guarantee of that. Cheryl and I are
I don't-
concerned the whole project will go down the.
We're not getting, my point is, before we get to the final vote of the RTC, we've got to, RTM, sorry. We've got to get through all of these boards, and at some particular point in time, somebody's going to say this dog isn't going to hunt. And we're going to have to ask the question, what do we need to do to make the dog hunt? To fix the process so we get it approved. But we have a plan, and again, I'm concerned about the architecture and the cost figures that they gave us to do this stage. And if we start doing, plan A and plan B and plan C, with or without the showers, with or without the boardwalks, blah, 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 we're going to be wasting their time. And we need to let the process go further to see what will happen.
Well, let me just follow up a little bit. What do you mean by this dog isn't going to fly? Who's going to tell us that?
The review boards that we're going through.
Well, P&Z will just say, you're following regulations. ZBA will decide whether they're going to give us a variance or not. They're not going to weigh in on, well, we don't think you should have this elevated structure, or we think this is a great idea.
So let's take the next step then. Let's talk about what we're really doing. So what we're doing is, first of all, the building that's there was built in 1978, so it's over 40 years old. You can now go back and you can look at the file that Jeremy has shared with us, and you can have a conversation with Jeremy and others. And it does certainly look as though those buildings were kind of moved forward pretty expeditiously just to get buildings up for the summer season, without much of a concern for really ultimately, in my take, what was going to be there. But that's a different story. Those are not the most lovely buildings. What we're doing now is we're building for the future. So the buildings that are proposed to withstand essentially a 100-year flood. So they're fully FEMA compliant. They're elevated. They are constructed in such a way that they'll be there for future generations. We know that there's a concern about whatever's happening with sea level. Nobody has a crystal ball, but those buildings are actually being proposed to be built now to withstand a 100-year flood. That's the VE15 zone requirement. So it seems as though it follows in a long tradition. This is my editorial kind of perspective on it. It seems as though it follows in a long tradition of the town investing in amenities to improve the quality of life for folks. So I'm trying to understand, are people saying we love these buildings so much, they're historical buildings, that we don't want to touch them? Because that, I don't get it. Or are we separately saying, maybe option B is, we really hate those buildings, but as a town, Darien doesn't have the wherewithal to afford to replace those buildings, even though what we're replacing will be for future generations? I don't get it. I'm sorry, somebody has to convince me that this is a town that can't afford the project that we're building here. Now, I'm not the numbers person, but I don't get that. Or somebody saying, we hate the buildings, we really can do something in a long tradition that Darien's followed for generations now in building to enhance the quality of life for people, but we just don't like that building. If that's the case, then let's talk about what we need to do to change that building. But we don't have an option if we're building to build at ground level. I wish we did. But FEMA requires that we have to go up 15 feet. And if you go back and you look at the ZBA requirements, or the ZBA application from 1978, they were already thinking about going up 13 feet. And we're only talking about going up 3 feet more than what they recommended back then.
I don't think anybody questions the need, if you build a new building, that you have to go up.
So what's the objection to a new building?
Well, I think the event space has driven the need, it's a new space,
But
so
what
it
is the
has to be a
objection,
new
though?
building.
Tell me what the objection is. Is it noise? Is it traffic? Is it sight lines? Is it, what is it?
I don't know.
Because none of those apply.
Nobody has made the case to
Because
be
none of
event
those apply.
space.
In my view, none of those concerns apply in this situation. We're talking about a room that maybe can accommodate an event of 30 people in the off-season.
But why do we
What-
need that?
Well, because we have something called Parks and Recs. We have a town that has various bodies now that are charged with identifying ways in which the lives of individuals in the community can be enhanced. There was a reason why Parks and Rec's mission statement was placed at the end of the FAQ, because that's their charge. The charge of Parks and Rec is to identify the ways in which they can make parks more accessible, improve the quality of the amenities at the parks, and by doing that, improve the quality of the life of people who live here through our parks.
Life is fine.
So if you're asking the question, that's the answer. Somebody has to convince me, and I'm open to being convinced that what we're doing here is contrary to something that enhances the quality of life for people in Darien. I don't get it. Honestly, I don't. And I'm open, my email's I'm open to have a conversation with anybody about it. But I don't get it. So I'm open to compromising, but I just don't see it, Martha. And I know you've been against it, but I'm mystified. I'm mystified what you're against, though. Are you against spending the money, or are you against?
The money, you know what, if somebody came and donated the money, I don't want to build that building. I don't think it's needed. I think event space for 35 people,
So a new
that's not going to enhance the quality of life.
library in town wasn't needed when the new library was built? Wait a minute.
Come on.
Hey.
Come on.
Come on.
No, I
These are
look at it,
amenities.
the first step is it needed? And then you look at the budget, and I stop at is it needed?
I think it's also.
Nothing in the parks is needed, Martha.
Charge was considered flexible community space. So now you're questioning the charge, which we went back to the DNC
But it
to
also
get
had
guidance on.
But it also had looking at renovated space.
If you took that to its
We
logical
looked at the
extreme,
renovated
our parks
space
aren't
and
needed at all.
Didn't.
And
We
we
don't
decided
need
it was
tennis
not
courts.
physically. And now somebody could.
You decided
somebody
what? I just said, I'm
should-
sorry.
We decided a year ago that $100,000 doesn't buy enough to make it worthwhile. But we still had the goal to try to keep some restrooms at grade level. And we've done that.
You know?
So,
I mean, you know, I give up. I mean, you know, I guess we're just not gonna have a meeting of the minds here, but.
Mr. Chairman, can we
Yeah.
move
No,
on?
Yeah, so look, I'm on the record. I'm open to compromise. I'm not sure where the compromise lies. I'm open to dialogue on this. But, we are where we are, and my recommendation is that we let the process go forward. I'm not sure that there's any value in having meetings in November. I'm happy to have conversations. I'm not sure what we would be doing in a meeting in November or multiple meetings in November that, I just don't see it, so.
May I suggest that we keep the dates on our calendars, so we know in the event that during the process of the next 6 weeks, that a meeting is required, it's already dated, and we could keep it going, but,
And a meeting could be canceled.
and the meeting can be canceled.
And may I ask if we have communications with FEMA or DEEP or whatever, and when Pam puts together her support for the space, if that can be shared with all the committee when it's, done, I'd appreciate that. It just keeps me better informed.
I agree.
We have a meeting scheduled for November 20th. And according to this chart, presentation to ZBA public hearing would be on the 20th.
Correct.
So we could call a meeting and then go to that ZBA meeting
Is that it?
Well-
as a group. And then that way we wouldn't be out of order.
I think we certainly should be represented at the ZBA meeting at any rate. To your point, if we're all there, it's,
It's under a meeting.
Yeah.
And then after the meeting, we can go back in and call a meeting to order again.
okay, I'm open to that.
And then we have a meeting on December 4th. January 21st, it goes to the other one. And then ARB is 12/10, and we have a meeting scheduled for December 11th, which is the day after that.
Well, we're meeting at the moment, the next meeting is scheduled for the 4th,
6th.
the 6th.
November.
When the election is on
The 5th.
5th?
I'm talking about the December meeting now. Right.
Okay, where are you?
This
December
This
4th.
is, this
right.
is next meeting, December 4th.
Yeah, our next meeting at the moment is proposed
Oh, that's
is
what you
December
said
4th.
on the agenda.
Correct, so
Right,
I think
I'm
what we're
looking at the
suggesting
calendar.
here is
We keep the
to
meeting.
add in keep the meeting at the 20th.
November 20th.
That's what you're suggesting?
Yes, but I'm also, yes,
That's the day of the ZBA.
that's the day of the ZBA meeting. What do they call it? If you can, I think of the word I want. You call your meeting to order, and then you
Oh, we could sort it out, Cheryl. I mean,
break it up, and there's a word in there, I can't think
You
of it.
adjourn to another meeting.
Return to another meeting or
Yeah.
something, and
Remember, we
then,
used to do that in the Board of Finance, we'll
Yeah.
have our joint meetings with the Board of Ed.
yes. So you call your meeting to order, and then you go on. Right.
Okay.
So we'll update this to reflect the fact that we're holding the meeting on the 20th.
Right. And the next meeting is supposed to be November 6th, but you don't want to meet then.
I don't feel there's anything to work through on the 6th.
Okay.
I'm one voice here, if you feel.
No, I agree, I don't know if they have anything to talk about, so we have the meeting on the calendar, we can keep it, and if something comes up in the next 2 weeks, we can say, we're gonna have it.
Yeah, I'd rather have these meetings on here and then cancel them as
Yeah,
needed.
I
It's
agree.
better that way.
Okay.
So is the 11/20 meeting officially canceled?
So the 11/20 meeting is actually happening?
No, had it been
No,
canceled.
nothing, not to my knowledge.
So it doesn't turn it into a special meeting?
No.
So we're just really gonna come and adjourn to go to the ZBA?
Adjourn, that's what it was. Adjourn to go to the ZBA and then come back if we want to talk about what happened after the ZBA meeting and there's time, then we can talk about that at the
Take
same
the
time.
opportunity to do that.
Mhm.
Yep. Good idea.
That makes sense.
May be problematical with time ZBA meetings sometimes take.
Right,
Sometimes it's
we don't know where we are on the agenda.
Where we are in the
Well,
agenda.
if it's possible, can you ask to go first, or is it,
We can.
just so to explain to them what we're trying to do, we're gonna go to a different
The
session?
chairman should call the chairman of the ZBA meeting and see if they can put us on the calendar for first so that we can reconvene. That's what it is, reconvene.
Okay.
Now, P and Z does not make the decision that night, do they?
No, it's
Yeah.
the yeah,
ZBA,
yeah.
pardon me.
Yeah.
Usually not.
Usually
No.
not, so I don't know.
Yeah, so at any rate, this,
See what
we should all be
happens.
represented at the
Right.
ZBA.
On the calendar.
Okay, so I just placed my agenda here. Of course, it may have already agenda.
Doesn't have it back, it's like notes.
Yeah. Okay, so before we move on to new business, I think it's been a good conversation here. Anybody else want to weigh in before we move on to Mark? Any other thoughts on your part on this conversation?
Yeah, I'm negative on the project, and I'm negative, but I don't mind the building. I think the architect has done a very fine, creative job, and I think that the building is fine. I also don't think we need the community room, but, that's, I'm going along. However, we build for like 40 years, right? I don't think the sea level is going to be such that before 40 years goes by, we're going to have a usable building. That parking lot's going to be underwater.
That's contradictory to a presentation I went to a couple of weeks ago, that we're not going to see that level of rise in this area from a NOAA person.
Oh, interesting.
And I can get you a copy of that report if you'd like to see it.
I would very much like to see it, and I don't know that either, but it's just like, I don't want to be in a position of spending money on a building that people won't go to because they don't want to drive in salt water.
Okay?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that, thank you.
No, I thought it was fascinating, because I was expecting it to be different. And this was the East Coast. It was the NOAA representative from the Massachusetts area.
Okay.
So, I don't
That'd be
know.
great if you could circulate it.
Yeah, I'll get it from you.
Thank you. Any other thoughts, Mark?
No,
Lori?
thank you.
Okay, so with that, why don't we move along to new business?
Mr. Chairman, I have one request on the new business is we have changed the meeting schedules between us and the Parks and Rec Committee. I would like to try to move these back to a more reasonable hour for some of us who work, and would like to go back to a 7:30 meeting time, if that's agreeable. Everybody, instead of 6 o'clock. Can I call for a vote for that? Do I need to call for a vote for that? I'm not sure. But I'll call for a vote for it and see if anybody disagrees.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure there's a vote necessary, but
Okay. Does anybody have a problem with it?
I'm good with it, because we,
Yeah, I
you know,
wasn't there when that was decided. 6 o'clock is really rough for those of us.
No, but
Yeah.
we were doing it,
Yeah.
we scheduled.
My question was that the only reason?
that was the only
That was the
reason was
only
because we had the meetings back to back.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. I just wanted to make sure that I know, obviously, we're
Thank you.
historically, we
We
try to be
just-
some-
we have to
somewhat
watch out on
sensitive
the
to
20th.
Pam's schedule.
Yeah.
We start with
Well, that's fine.
ZBA.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did we all, wait a minute, did we all hear that?
I'm sorry, what was it?
Why did we meet at 6 o'clock?
Because Parks and Rec had the meeting on the same day at 8 o'clock,
And because Pam works all day.
and she needs to be at both places at the same time.
Well, not only that, she has an extraordinarily long trip home.
Okay.
And I think I mean, she understood fully when she took this job that it requires night meetings, the amount of energy and dedication that that woman has displayed, and she's not here to hear this, has been truly remarkable.
Yes.
I hear from her Saturdays, I hear from her Sundays, I hear from her at 7 o'clock in the morning, I hear from her at 10 o'clock at night. I routinely told her that, you know, if I send her an email at night because I have to do a lot of this after my work hours, that she shouldn't feel compelled to answer, but she does. So there absolutely, I think, is some, you know, she has over an hour drive home. So when we leave here at 10:30 at night, she's getting home at 11:30 to midnight. And I know after the meeting last week, she had to get back here early and she got 4 hours of sleep. So I know we have to work about everybody's schedule, but
Yeah.
Could we, you know, do a
But-
little bit of time by start at 7 or something?
I do worry about her because she's an amazing town employee.
Yeah.
I
So
really
can we do
worry.
7 instead of 7:30?
Yeah.
Sure.
For those of us who
That's
travel?
fine.
Yeah.
Is that
I'm
good
sure
for you?
anything helps her.
And-
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll update the upcoming meetings to 7 PM. Thank you for that. So I think before I open it up to public comment, I think that's the next item on the agenda. I would like to just take the opportunity on our one day less than one year anniversary here to thank two members who are stepping off the committee. So thank you, Diana, as our representative from the Board of Finance. Your voice has been great. Similarly, Mark, thank you very much as a representative from the Board of Selectmen. You've kind of helped guide this committee through, and certainly it's its early days to kind of keep us on the straight and narrow here. And much appreciated. So your voices will be missed, and we're not sure who will be joining the committee. I guess that remains to be seen, but I just want to express our appreciation, and maybe what we'll do is make a
From the Board
motion
of
to...
Finance, there'll be a new assignment after November 5th.
Yes, right, yeah.
Unless the elections are
When does the Board of Finance meet after the election?
pretty quick.
Pretty quickly, but I think that also you could have somebody that volunteers to participate in the committee structure, and the board, the chairman of the Board of Finance can assign someone.
We don't meet
earlier
again till the
than
20th, you got time.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd like to invite a motion just to officially express the appreciation of the committee for the work that these guys have done.
Second.
All those in favor?
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
guys.
you.
Much
Thank you.
appreciated.
It's been a
Thank you,
pleasure.
Mark.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
great. Okay, so with that, we'll move on to public comment. And we're here to listen. So I would just ask, as you come up, if you could just state your name and your address. If folks are reading into the record emails or messages that have come from others, we'll need you to just make sure that we've got the names and addresses of those folks as well. So, please. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Nancy Stein, 15 Crane Road. Happy anniversary. We've shared in the anniversary. We've been here since the start too. I just have a couple of questions. I've had several.
I'm sorry, Nancy, can I just cut you off? One of the things that has made this awkward for this past year is that, the town protocol for these types of meetings is that when we get to public comment, the committee is here to listen. Public comment that doesn't really allow for a dialogue back and forth. So we'll try to maybe make some exceptions here, but, maybe coming up on
I'm
your
used to my 2
anniversary.
minutes. I'll be quick. The first thing I wanted to say was, I'm going to take it back to kind of the beginning. And the one thing we've never had a clear understanding of is why do we need community space? I mean, when you look at our town, to your point, we have a beautiful library with lots of rooms. We have a YMCA. I heard David Genovese the other night, and he's bringing lots of restaurants and space. Joe Warren came up and actually said that he rents out space in the fire department. Who knew? I didn't know that. There's a ton of space, and most importantly, there's space down at Wee Beach. We've asked a bunch of times for numbers, maybe for about 6 months now, on how much money that generates. So we dug in ourselves, and it turns out it's about $10,000. And I guess it begs the question, if we have all the space in town, why do we need more community space? Now that we're not talking about the space in the 2-story flood zone structure that's going to cost lots and lots of money, why do we need that? That's sort of one big question, but with lots of different components in it. The other question that it begs, we've talked about flooding, we've talked about, why it floods. It's not up for argument. It floods. The parking lot's flooded. It doesn't matter if the water's in there for 2 hours. It doesn't matter if the water's in a half an hour. To your point, it floods all the time. Like, it floods a lot all the time for a variety of reasons. Why are we building in a flood zone? Spending all of this money in a flood zone doesn't make any sense to a lot of the residents in town. The other question that begs an answer is, the one thing that residents did want is to refurbish the buildings that were down there, make it look pretty. They're not attractive buildings, but they have stood the test of time. I went down with the builder, and it is structurally sound. We're not taking anything away. The concession area down there basically offers refrigerated food, drinks, and ice cream. The one thing that people do want is bathroom. Now, we're making the bathroom smaller in this plan, and guess what? We're not elevating. It's staying in the flood zone that we keep talking about, that we have to go up, FEMA, everything. Why do we leave a bathroom that's arguably the most important part of what the residents of town have asked for, a nicer bathroom down there? Why are we making it smaller, and why are we keeping it in the flood zone? And to your point with FEMA and DEEP, we have not met with them. We probably should meet with them, but we have not yet. But on the DEEP website, it does in fact say that the sound will increase 20 inches by 2050, and that speaks to what Mark was saying about, will the building even be there, whether it's breakaway walls or not. And we did have people from the boat place that work there saying they're stuck there because nobody wants to drive their car through salt water. It doesn't matter if the salt water is there for a half an hour, 3 hours, 5 hours. It happens twice a day when it floods. People who go down there realize that it happens quite a bit. The damage that the sand and the salt water does, even if it's for a half an hour, is significant to your elevator shaft. Doesn't matter if the cab of the elevator is on the second floor, the mechanics are all on the first floor.
I'm sorry, that's not true.
That's not true.
What's not true?
The mechanics for the elevator, the mechanics and the electronics are all above level 15.
Okay, well, that's
Okay?
good to know.
That's the case at the Tokenie Club, it's the case at the...
I'm a member at the Tokenie Club, and I've talked to the manager down there. They have to sandbag that. It's been a huge, huge issue for them. In fact, it's a part of their budget, their upcoming budget. I believe it's about $35,000 to, I know my terminology is not right, but to waterproof it. So I suggest you talk to the manager down at Tokenie Club. They've had lots and lots of issues. So thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Aldo Criscola, 17 Crane Road. First of all, I want to thank everybody on the committee for your community service. Thank you very much. So my biggest concern, and Nancy addressed a lot of my concerns very well, very articulate. My biggest concern is what Mark mentioned about putting a building in a flood zone. So I have a unique perspective on flooding because I live at 17 Crane Road. It's the house behind 136 Pear Tree Point, the house with like a mansard roof. And I've been on Crane Road for 20 years. And in the beginning, it wasn't bad. But now, within the last 10 years, we get severe flooding in our backyard. And I'm not exaggerating when I say a foot of water in my whole backyard. And what happens is when the beach comes up, the water goes down into the storm drain to the left of the guard booth, and it just fills it up. And I have a storm drain on my property, and backs up onto my property.
Mhm.
So it used to happen maybe once a year. Now it's happening 3 times a year. So this is some severe flooding, and I don't know if a check valve is going to fix that. From what I heard tonight, it's not.
No.
You know, the check valve will just kind of help with some of the puddling in the parking lot, some of that water. But I think you should really think about that. If you're building a community room to be used off-season, when most of the flooding happens, people won't be able to use it. So, you know, I'm in favor of improvements at the beach because it needs it. But you really, before you put a $2 million building or a $3 million building, really consider how are you going to maintain it? How are people going to access it? You know, so I think that's an important issue. And another thing I'd like to mention, why not put the valve in now and see what happens? See,
The valve's there.
is it there?
No.
Because
It's
I've
not
heard
working.
a couple of different stories. We've
Doesn't
heard that
work.
it's not there and that it's not working. And so that, why hasn't the town fixed that if it's not working? Why have we put up even Parks and Rec? Why have we had flooding in the parking lot when we want to create spaces for the community to use? You know,
And I'll just answer that. They didn't know, okay, until Weston and Sampson and the surveyor started to do a complete study of the plan there. They did not know that there wasn't a check valve there. And I think Lori and Pam are having discussions already with, at Gentile, with Public Works to see if we can do that right away.
Yeah, because that would make a lot of sense, right? It would make sense to
And
do
then
that now.
find out how much effect it will have. I
Right.
think that's very much on our radar, and it doesn't have to be necessarily part of this project. It can be done without it.
All right, I hope it's done soon. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Ed.
Hi, my name is Kathy Finnegan. I live at 22 Patricia Lane. I have not been part of this process, I admit, but it's been only recently that I came to understand the significant project and the things that are being proposed, which has caused me to come out here tonight. I am not a neighbor, I don't have any agendas outside, and I think I represent a part of the community that you may not really believe is there and is concerned. I'm speaking as a citizen concerned about coastal area management, sea level rise, coastal resiliency, and sustainability. And I support improvements to Pear Tree Point that are designed with those goals as the primary goals for passive recreation under the terms of coastal resiliency and the world in which we in Darien will live in the next 10 to 30 or even 40 years, like the building that exists now. We don't have time to have protracted discussion about these matters, but I would like to suggest that this project should be reconsidered or put on hold or reevaluated through conversations of coastal resiliency and the real costs associated with work, insurance, FEMA, changes to FEMA rules and things like that that are all coming down the pike or could come down the pike. And I thought that a helpful thing to do would be to tell you about 2 events, programs that took place in the last 2 years in Darien that were meant to inform us as citizens about our future at the coast. The first was Commissioner Klee, who was the head of Connecticut Deep in 2018, quoting the Darien Times. Klee constantly emphasized the ways climate change affects daily lives in Connecticut. One particular example was rising sea level of Connecticut coastline. And the quote from Klee is, "The punchline is a 50 centimeter increase by 2050. Decisions will need to take account that the coast is changing that the difference, nearly 2 feet, is concerning." The second event that took place most recently in April of 2019 was a panel discussion at the library on sea level rise, hosted by the Connecticut Fund for the Environment, Save the Sound, the Nature Conservancy, and UConn-based institute, the Connecticut Institute for Resilience and Climate Adaptation. There were over 100 people who attended that meeting at the Darien Library. And the work of CIRCA that I want to leave with you for consideration is the recommendation that all planning be done using the sea level rise information of 20 centimeters by 2050, and that it will and sea level will continue to rise after that. And they recommend that these scenarios be updated regularly, and as we all know, the sea is rising, the floods are coming. I'm an owner of a property in Rowayton, and we are experiencing the exact same things on our beaches and parking lot that you're describing at Pear Tree. And we actually just held back on a $2 million project in a parking lot because almost 2/3 of the owners rejected the money based on the fear of what sea level rise would do to that investment over the next 10 to 20 to 30 years. I'm going to leave you a set of papers that I could only print once in color because my printer was running out of ink, but I used the circa, well, there's a name for it. It's called the Connecticut Sea Level Rise and Storm Surge Viewer, and anyone can use it. I used it myself. I will leave you all the property, all the pictures. Anybody can look on them. But when you look at the picture, they will all get passed around, and you look at mean high water, and you say, oh, there's the beach, and there's no problem. There's sand and there's water, and we'll be fine, and we can build a building, and we can put an elevator in. But you start putting the factors in there, and you put that mean high water rise, you even say, okay, 20 inches of sea level rise. Doesn't change a whole lot. Still can see, oh, the beach is there, the building looks like it's not underwater. Add a 100-year flood event. Start looking. There's a totally different graph. Everything's underwater. You add 1 foot sea level rise, 20 feet sea level rise, 100-year storm, and you're looking at changes to Pear Tree Point Beach and our entire community that, from my listening tonight, have not been considered in the plan. I'm not against Darien enhancing its beaches and having recreation for all its citizens, be they young, be they old, be they handicapped. But I think before this kind of money is spent, the town is owed a much more thorough look at resiliency, coastal engineering, and the real cost of that kind of construction over a 2 to 5 to 20 to 30-year period. And I will end with, you wanted to make sure people didn't quote other people. I will quote my daughter, who's 22 years old. She just graduated from University of Vermont with a degree in fisheries biology, having spent a semester in New Zealand looking at coastal flooding projects, and did a capstone project of that nature overseas. And she said, let's not, and she put this on Facebook, it's public, let's not build inside a high-risk flood zone. Uninformed decisions put the town at risk. Read up on coastal geography and management before approving this plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Janine Hackett, 112 Pear Tree Point Road. Thank you, Mark. Thank you. I forget you first. For your service, and thank all of you for your service, for serving on the committee. We've been here with you, as we've said before. It's been a long year. The one thing that I really do take objection to, and I don't want to fight with any of you. I don't want to not be friends with any of you in town. I respect what you're doing, but the thing we really take objection to is what Martha brought up, which is you just have dismissed right from the start. And I know you say, Tom, that going back, we've already discussed we're not going to do that. You never fully investigated just renovating the building. And that's the problem that the large majority of people in town who are objecting to this have with it, is that you just, in a meeting, dismissed it. You said, oh, it's only $98,000, it's not going to be enough. And that's just not true. And that's where you're getting the backlash. And that is the majority of the backlash of all the people that have been coming to all these meetings for the past year, is the fact that you just never gave us an alternative to just renovate the buildings. And it started with, the main driving focus was from the Parks and Recs Commission, and it was to build community space, a rental space, a restaurant. I mean, we went through all kinds of renditions as to what was going to be down at that beach. And from the very beginning, we've been screaming, we don't want a two-story structure. We want the concession stand renovated, we want the bathrooms renovated. As Nancy said, we hired our own builder. They tell us it can be done. But you won't ever look into it. You went full throttle, even though we begged you every meeting, can we just hold off for a second and look into this? And you haven't, and I think that's the problem, and that's where you have the angst of the community. And yes, you have made concessions to various things. Yes, it went from 4,000 square feet down to whatever it is now, and And yes, you've eliminated berms, although I just still think you need a berm on the West Beach because that's where the flooding is, but I will defer to my other neighbors who don't want them. And I know you've given in to other things, but they're not the main thing. The main thing was the two-story structure. And that's the part that has the community upset. And I know, Lori, at your last meeting, you said you have equal people for and against it. So here are the signatures of 720 people, and I'll give you a copy.
Thank you, Jim.
And I will email everybody else a copy of 720 people that don't want the two-story structure specifically, not don't want the project, not don't want the boat ramp, the various other things you're doing. It is the two-story structure. They just want the bathrooms and the concession stands renovated and to keep it small and not have that structure. And that's the thing that's just not going to go away. And I know you tried, Cheryl, to say, can we just take a breath before we proceed? And that's what we keep asking you. I'm not going to get into all the other things I want to say, but I'd like you to read that, take it into account, and taking you up on your offer, Mike. We're going to have coffee.
Wonderful.
Okay?
That's great.
And I look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Jean.
I'm Julie Potter. I've been a resident on Pear Tree Point
Excuse me,
for
Julie.
20 years now. My husband and I have
Julie.
lived there.
Excuse me, Julie, can I have your street address?
Yes, 86.
I don't need the number.
86 Pear Tree Point.
Thank you.
It's amazed me how the advancement of these plans have gone forward from the bids originally submitted. I read that you were going to renovate the existing building, more area for picnicking at the beach, correction to the boat ramp, and more landscaping, and maybe there were other things too. I'm asking one simple question, and I hope I can get some kind of an answer from you after a year. What led our city to determine they needed such a rental facility, and why did they decide to build a two-story structure at such an exorbitant price? I've been amazed also that you have had a lot of opposition to this, and we need listening ears. The voice of the people here in Darien are speaking. No, it may not be the majority of everyone here, and some do accept and want this, but there's a lot of voices that need to be heard, and I think the evidence of the RTM getting the kind of comments and reaction that they're listening to now is also justification that we must give this a lot more time. Please consider this, please. Our voices matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Delise Bolatin, 150 Pear Tree Point Road. I'm sure you've all have that memorized by now. I also want to thank you for the time you're putting into this. I can see that it's an arduous process, and you give your personal time, so I appreciate that. I also really want to thank Cheryl and Martha for listening to what we've been saying, and for really, I kind of feel like representing the residents of this town with your comments tonight. I really appreciate that. I obviously agree with everything that's been said tonight, and I thought everybody had very thoughtful comments. I also want to point out one of my concerns, along with everything else that was mentioned, is the maintenance of a project like this over time. I live across from the beach. I see it every single day, every season. I know that not everything gets maintained over there. And maybe it's a staffing issue, a cost issue, but that's going to be the case going forward. And this is going to be even more maintenance than what currently exists there. And just as an example of what is not maintained, I remember last spring when, I don't know if it was this committee, but there was a decision to replace the guard booth because it had rotted from the flooding that happened a lot. And the discussion was to prevent that from happening again, the structure was going to be removable. It was going to be put there for the season, and once the beach season was over, it was going to be removed and stored somewhere so that it could be maintained in good condition. Well, guess what? We learned, well, it was so much trouble to install it that now we're just not going to take it away. And you know, Pam's comment was, well, if there's a big storm coming, we'll move it. You know what? I don't believe that, because if it's such a big effort, how are you going to have the time to remove it for a storm? It's just not going to happen. So this guard booth will probably also rot over time from the flooding, and then it'll have to be replaced again. And I just think that's just an example of, you know, not thinking things through as far as they need to be. So I suspect if this project goes through down the road, you're going to have all these problems with this building. It's going to cost more money to try to fix it or maintain it, or it won't be maintained, and then it'll just look terrible and not get used. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members?
I just want to go on record. My name is Cindy Hampton. My maiden
I'm sorry,
name.
Cindy, I didn't hear you.
My name is Cindy Hampton.
Okay,
My maiden name is Van Skyver.
okay.
I grew up in this town.
And your
I've been
st-
here.
Your street address?
Old Kings Highway South.
Thank you.
I am not adjacent to the beach, but I'm a resident in this town, and I do have major concerns about what's being proposed here. Okay? I think Weed Beach, there were a lot of changes that were made there. I'm sorry I didn't open my mouth and say something because I can't stand Weed Beach right now. I have to be honest. My kids are 5th generation. We don't go to Weed anymore. We go to Pear Tree. That's our beach. It's a beautiful open beach. 2 beaches. I grew up there. Ray Donnell taught me how to swim there. Okay? I really think you need to think about this and reach out to the community and be honest with them about what's being proposed here in every aspect. 2.whatever million to build it is only one piece of it. The upkeep, the maintenance, the fact that that beach is flooded all the time, okay? All the time. I walk that point all the time with my husband. When I got married, my wedding pictures were taken down there in November. My niece just got married, her wedding pictures were taken down there. It's a beautiful beach. It needs work. It needs some TLC. Our own website says that our picnic area is handicap accessible and everything. I think it is, okay? Otherwise, we're false advertising. And I think we need to look at what's on the town's website. It's arguably on the website one of the most beautiful beaches in Fairfield County. I would argue that it is. I can't tell you how sad Weed Beach makes me with those berms and the visibility. I think that people need to truly understand this, and it wasn't until somebody opened my eyes that I realized what was being proposed here, and I had to have a voice. I don't live near there, okay, arguably. I'm on the other side of town. I'm over there, okay? But it saddens me, quite honestly. It breaks my heart to hear that we even are thinking about putting a 2-story building there and building a deck around that gazebo. I mean, I don't understand why we would do that. The ramp needs work, the picnic area needs work. I was here when the buildings burned down, the original ones. Believe me, they were anything but attractive. But you know what? The buildings that were built there, they may have been temporary, but they've lasted over 40 years. Have they not? In a flood zone? So I guess what I'm hearing, coming late to the game, is that have you really done maybe it's not your job, but has anyone done their homework and really looked at what could potentially be done with what's there versus spending $2.5 million on renovations, new building? Just, I kind of felt, and I read at length everything, I kind of felt that we're trying to get around FEMA a little bit here because we only get $100,000 to do the renovations because of the valuation of the existing buildings or what's there. I don't know that that's the right approach, that the only way to get what we want is to build a new structure. Something doesn't feel right about this, and I guess, quite honestly, if I have to be more vocal or bring people out, I know my mother's opposed to it. I know she called Cheryl and had a conversation with her. She's a longtime Darien resident. She was town clerk here for over 20 some odd years. I mean, my family's kind of embedded here. So I think you can't really, I've read commentary that it's really only the people that are close by the beach that feel strongly about this. I don't think that's the case at all.
Well, by the way, you didn't hear that, and that's not a statement that anybody on this panel has made.
Okay, but I did.
Well, I'm sorry.
Okay.
It's,
You said it tonight. You did.
No, you didn't hear that from anybody on this panel. And
So, and I just...
No, hold on.
Okay.
I'm sorry, 1 second here.
Mhm.
What was said this evening is there's a skepticism as to whether or not the voices we've heard fully represent the entire town. So nobody is suggesting anything other than that. And the suggestion is to allow the process to continue to its normal conclusion. But I have great respect, and I've told you that I've been very, very impressed by the information we've gotten and the letters that we've gotten. And so I'm sorry, that's a mischaracterization of what you've heard from this committee and the members of the committee.
And I can appreciate
I
that.
have to say one thing because it literally makes me shake. Every time I hear people criticize Wheat Beach, I had nothing to do with those berms and everything going there. I think it's magnificent. So just understand there are many of us in town who love that. People, to me, and I've said it publicly, I don't care if someone's 5th generation or they'll live here 2 months. My husband's family is 3rd generation. My children grew up here, they're 4th generation, and now grandchildren. They love Wheat Beach and they think what's done has been beautiful. So just please accept there are those of us who love what was done to Wheat Beach.
There
I
are.
can tell you as someone who goes there almost every weekend for 25 years. We used to go down with friends when our kids were this high and we had Wheat Beach to ourselves on a Friday night. I go there now, I go with my grandchildren who are this high, and the place is jammed and it's full and it's noisy and it's busy, and nothing makes me happier, and people do love that beach. So please don't besmirch it. It really, really upsets, something that upsets me
So for
much.
somebody who grew up...
Cheryl and I, you and I have had that conversation, and
So
my
for
family
somebody who-
members grew up here as well.
So for me, I don't
That's your
like what
opinion.
was done. And you're right, it is my
But
opinion,
that's your
just like
opinion,
you
but
have your
just
opinion.
understand that some of us
And
really
Wheat
love that
Beach is
beach.
another whole animal because I won't even get into my thoughts of $1.5 million for a boardwalk next door to Wheat Beach, and all of a sudden we are very conveniently gonna reconfigure our wetlands so that we can do this. That's
You're
another
actually
whole.
improving
Okay, that's
the
another
wetlands.
whole.
May
That's
I-
another whole
wait,
thing.
May I? And
Yeah.
Cindy, we really are appreciative of what you're, please, I'm not trying to cut you off, but I think I'd rather keep the subject to what's happening at Pear Tree Beach.
To Pear Tree. And that's
Sorry,
my...
Mike, it just really upsets
So,
me.
just to let you know how strongly I feel about this, I left my job in New York to drive and deal with 95 traffic at that hour to get here, to still be late for a 6 o'clock meeting, to sit here all this time, I haven't even been home yet, just to be heard. I think something needs to be done. I'm in agreement with that. I mean, something has to be done to improve those buildings, improve the picnic area, and believe me, my husband is a marine technician. He lives at that boat club, okay? So I know there are improvements that can be made down there, but what's being proposed here is just not something that I feel, as a resident, I would support. And I guess what concerns me is I think that people, sometimes decisions happen in a vacuum, and I just don't know how many residents, and I wonder if you put it to the residents with the proposal and had them actually vote on it and have say what they say about it truthfully. These people have been living with it and coming over a year. As I said, I'm coming late to the game, but that's my feeling, and I'm a little protective of Pear Tree because I happen to love it the way it is, with all its flaws.
Thank you very much.
Okay?
Thank you. Any other comments?
I know I spoke, but just Lori, I just wanted to say, Weed Beach, I thank you.
Excuse me, you've got to go to the mic because we're being taped.
Sorry, I just, really quickly, again, Janine Hackett. I guess just the point, I just want to make sure, some people love Weed Beach and some people love Pear Tree Point. They're very different feel, very different character, and I would never insult your work that you did at Weed Beach. It's fabulous.
I did the work.
No, okay, whoever did it, it's great, but it's not for everyone in town. And so I think that's been a big thing of our thing of preserve Pear Tree Point Beach. It's because we don't want it to be a weed beach. We don't want a big new structure or whatever. And I know, yeah, we're not going to have tennis courts and all that, but we just like it the way it is. We like the small thing. We don't want the decks. We don't want the buildings. We don't want it because it's a completely different feel. And that's just what that means, preserve Pear Tree Point Beach. There's two views on what a beach should look like. Thank you.
I agree, totally.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. Maybe before I ask for a motion to adjourn, I would just say I'm convinced there's a compromise. I'm absolutely convinced, and that's just one person's view here. And I personally, and I know all of us genuinely and sincerely appreciate the feedback we've been getting, and I know the happy anniversary is also for many of us here. I know we've been together for a year here, and we're getting to know one another. And so, that's why I suggest we allow the process to continue and go through to some logical conclusion, because once again, I have faith in the processes that I think have served this town very, very well for a very long time. I may be naive. I may be the only person who believes that, but I do have faith. And Janine, I really look forward to us following up and having a coffee and continuing the dialogue. So with that, if there's,
I got just one other comment. It keeps coming up that this raised structure is $2.5 million. It's not $2.5 million. It's like 1.3 million. I know that's still a lot of money, but I just want to make the point. It's not 2.5, it's not 4, it's not 6. Okay? And the other part of the total budget package is the site work and the ramp and the rest of that work. That's about $1 million.
But the entire project is
The entire project.
But the pilings for the structures haven't been
Yes,
decided. The cost of the pilings that go in the water, how far they go down, that's pretty significant,
They
right?
they have estimated what they think it's going to be, and of course there'll be test borings and all that, and it'll all be recalculated as we go along.
Yeah. Can I just ask one more question? I know. Sorry.
I just have one more question. It's my understanding in some of the meetings that there's a flat rate for Neil, the architect. So if there's a flat rate and it's no extra expense, instead of maybe changing the color of the buildings to lighter colors versus blue or green or whatever it is, can he possibly do a quick rendering of doing work for the existing buildings? I think you've probably heard loud and clear that that's what a lot of residents are asking for, and I know that it was voted down, but it was voted down before, quite frankly, a lot of people were fully informed of the project. And the other thing that I just have to state for the record, with all due respect, again, we appreciate all of your work, but it's been implied that it's more of a neighborhood or people with big homes and country clubs, and that's not the case. Please look at the 730 signatures and see that everybody is in different size homes and different streets and throughout the town, and it's not just the neighbors.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to just make a note of that.
That is definitely acknowledged, so appreciate that.
Can we?
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, what's kind of being discussed here is, so we did have Neil, in response to Martha's request along the way, we did have Neil do a rendering of some site work and deck structures adjacent to the existing buildings. What we, yeah, I mean, certainly with the $100,000 that we have available to us, I think it's pretty well understood, and we may be actually asked to do that as we, you know, in a more formal way as we're going through the process, to present maybe an estimate around that. But we understand we have $100,000 for the buildings. We are not limited, by the way, by the $100,000 FEMA 50% rule for doing other things at the site. So, you know, we did present a plan that showed decking around the gazebo and some other kind of amenities in the area. So, just to be clear on that, to go on the record on that. Anyway, to that point, we did have a discussion, and you know, the information is available as well. And at some point, if somebody wants to reach out to me, I can just point you to where that is in the decks that we presented.
I'll have coffee with you too.
Fantastic.
Some
Some real perks coming out of this here.
I'll even buy you coffee.
I appreciate it. Really, I do appreciate it. So maybe with that, maybe I should quit while I'm ahead here with 2 invitations. I'd invite a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.